What's up, fam? Smash the like button for the algorithm and let's get started with the story. Watching the workers cut down the forest, the father said to his son, "Tell me, son, what do you think is the most important character trait in every person?" Hearing such a sudden question from his father, the son was surprised and wondered why he was asking such questions. Having received an answer to his question, the man folded his arms to his sides and smiled, saying, "That's a good answer." To which his son replied with a grudging smile, "What would be a good answer?" Hearing the discontent in his son's words, Lord Leo Richard Felina confidently spoke, "The main thing is a good heart." Hearing such a strange answer from his father, the son said in surprise that he was sorry, to which his father added that to a large extent, the virtues of a lord should depend on character. This applies to your friends as well as your family, and from time to time, even with thieves. You will have to use each of these roles, and in whatever situation you find yourself, you have to give it your all. You will definitely be able to create a connection with everyone around you. After listening to his father's instructions, the son just sighed heavily. The next moment, not far from him, Lord Leo Richard Felina heard someone's voice calling out, "He, sir!" Approaching his lord, the subject, breathing heavily after the cross-country run, said, "I am sorry to interrupt your conversation, but may I ask you the same thing, if it does not bother you?" To which the lord replied, "Of course, Charles." Hearing the request from the worker, Richard Felina stepped forward a little and said, "Simon, move back a little. Charles, you too." As soon as everyone moved to a safe distance, Lord Leo Richard Felina began to recite his spell to summon the dead. A few seconds later, skeletons appeared from his magic circle. As soon as the ritual was over, the skeletons immediately went to Charles with a request. With an awkward smile, Charles pointed to the logs behind the shed that needed to be moved. Having received the task, the skeletons immediately set to work and began to haul logs. Having received help from his lord, Charles joyfully exclaimed, "Thank you very much, sir." To which he joyfully replied, Yes, keep up the good work." At the same time, looking at his father, the son mentally noted, he created an additional workforce using the dead. What a great necromancer he is. After all, necromancers are special magicians who are able to use forbidden black magic. A long time ago, to get rid of the influence of necromancers, the ruler of the Thalhar Empire sent 50,000 soldiers in response to an attack by the enemy. The rulers of Kizan sent 10 necromancers to counteract them and hold back this gigantic army. There were only 10 necromancers, but soon all 50,000 soldiers were turned into the dead, and they left absolutely nothing of the Thal Empire. The result of this campaign, known as the so-called Roses Team, was the surrender of the Thal Empire, and as a result of a reckless attack, the rotting corpse of the emperor met his miserable end sitting on the throne of a fallen empire. This is how the era of the necromancers began, during which they were able to capture half the continent. However, another force that interfered with the necromancers' rule and dominated the other half of the continent was the humans. Priests were the only rivals of necromancers, who used the divine power granted to them for serving the goddess Dave. As Simon watched the summoned skeletons help the workers with their duties, he thought to himself, "They did a pretty good job, but it had nothing to do with feudal law." Lord Leo Richard Felina's town was located somewhere almost at the very edge of the map. It was a small town, even the villages nearby did not know about it. "And I am Simon Felina, a descendant of the ruler of these lands." After spending some time with his father, the boy returned home and said, "I'm home." Hearing the voice of her son, Anna Felina, who was Simon's mother, happily said, "Simon, you're back." To which he replied, "Yes, I was helping with the reports." Hearing that he was helping his father with his work, Simon's mother said, "Wow, you must be hungry." "Wait a bit." When he approached his mother and looked at what she was cooking, the boy asked in surprise, "What is it?" She replied that it was a broth infused with lahara mushrooms. When he heard what the food was made of, the boy was disappointed and said, "But they're poisonous, Mom." To which she confidently replied, "Yes, but don't worry, your mother made them edible." Then she used divine magic to purify the food from all the bad things. Watching the process of purifying the food from poison, Simon mentally said a blessing. "My mother was a priestess in the past. Every time I see her strength in action, I wonder how my mom and dad met. They are so different." The next moment the boy heard, "Simon, still looking at the mushrooms, why don't you sit down and have a bite to eat?" He replied, "Oh, sure." Approaching the table, the boy saw many different dishes prepared by his mother. Having tasted the food, Simon put the spoon aside and saw his mother nervously ask, "You ate so little today, do you have a pain, or are you suddenly ill?" After a snack, he took a bath and went to his room, where he witnessed his parents still tenderly touching each other. He mentally noted that they were still on their honeymoon. Noticing that their son was heading to his room, his mother said, "Good night, Simon." He said, "Good night to you as well." As soon as he entered his room, a letter flew into his face. Taking the parcel off his face and picking it up, the guy asked what it was in surprise, trying to figure out what had just happened. Simon added that the next moment he looked up at his window and saw a beautiful girl. As soon as he noticed her, she smiled happily and said, "Well, hello?" Ignoring the girl, the boy put the letter on the table and went to bed. Seeing this reaction, the girl angrily exclaimed, "Hey! Don't pretend you don't see me!" Trying to draw attention to herself, the girl tugged at the blanket off Simon, who added offensively, "Hey, I know you can see me! Get up now!" Resigned to the fact that he could not simply ignore her, Simon got up from the bed and said, "Good Lord! Who are you? How did you get here? Are you lost?" To which the girl replied, "I'm not lost, silly." Pointing her finger at the guy, the girl confidently added, "I'm here to meet you, Simon Felina." When Simon heard that he had just been approached, he nervously exclaimed, "How do you know my name?" To which the girl replied, "With a letter." The next moment, his parents came running to his cry, with a rolling pin and a frying pan, nervously exclaiming to Simon, "What is happening?" Seeing the boy's parents, the girl happily exclaimed, "That Richard was Anna." To which they surprisingly replied, "Nepos." Starting to toss the guest joyfully, her father exclaimed, "Oh my God! You haven't changed a bit." And Nepos replied, "I missed you so much." Anna added, "We missed you too." Simon said, "Mom, Dad," in surprise. After greeting his longtime friend, his father pointed to Nepos and said, "Simon, introduce yourself to her." By all means, this is the legendary Nepos Archbold. When Simon heard who was standing in front of him, he nervously said that it was Nepos Archbold, drenched in cold sweat from nervousness. The guy added that this could not be the same Nepos Archbold who turned Emperor Thaler into a weak-willed puppet, a witch who had been living for 300 years. When the arresting officer realized who was standing in front of him, the girl confidently said, "Yes, I am the same Nepos Archbold from Kaizen." After realizing his situation, the guy opened the letter and nervously said in his head, "What does this letter mean? Or could it be?" After which the girl said, "Let me make an official offer to Simon Felina." Having unsealed the letter that was brought to him, Simon read a letter from the Kaizen administration to Simon Fi. When she saw that he had read the letter, she stretched out her hand and said, "Come with me to Kaizen." Without waiting for an answer, she reached out the window and shouted, "Goodbye. Well, I'll see you in Kaizen." As soon as Nepos Archbold left their home, Simon's father said, "Simon, let me see the letter." When the son heard his father's request, he held it out and said, "Oh yes, take it." After reviewing the contents of the letter, the father read, "Simon Felina was enrolled on special terms." To which the son replied to his father that she would expect the same in Kaizen. Interrupting his son, the father said confidently, "Yes, this city is home to the Necromantic Elite and the Dark Alliance, and it is also home to the School for Necromancers, Nepos, with whom you just met, the chancellor of that school." Remembering the girl and her behavior, Simon was surprised to hear that she was a chancellor. His father confidently replied that she looked just like her. After his father's answer, Simon asked, "Okay, let's go. By the way, where is this Kaizen? Far from here?" To which his father thoughtfully replied, "It's very far away. It's located on the island of Arok. You have to take a ship in Langaran, the capital of the kingdom, and travel quite a long way to the island." The next moment, putting his hand on his son's shoulder, Richard added confidently, "But don't worry, Simon, there are plenty of things to do in Langaran, and the island of Arok is not a boring place." To top it all off, Kaizen is famous for its stylish uniforms. When Simon heard this, he was surprised to hear that it was a uniform. Joining the conversation between father and son, Anna said, "Well, in that case, you'll be very busy until the enrollment ceremony." Hearing this, Simon was taken aback, and his father replied that to become a necromancer, one needed to be properly prepared at school. "You will have to learn skills, so first we will open your core." Hearing this, Anna was surprised to hear that. "Then wouldn't he have to learn the basics of black magic?" To which Richard replied, "Of course. I will teach him that as well. Oh yes, and he will also have to learn breathing techniques, so from tomorrow, forget about sleeping altogether." After the meeting with Nepos, the hardest week of Simon's life began. That day marked the start of the week of preparing for Kaizen. His mother and father said good things about school life and that he would have fun there. but the sudden invitation to school seemed to worry them both. Preparing for the opening of his son's core, Richard said, "It might hurt, but you have to be patient." To which Simon replied, "Well, 3 days a week, I didn't sleep at all while I was forming the core with the help of my father's magic." After the core formation was completed, his father said, "Now exhale slowly." In the remaining days, Simon learned to breathe and took his father's black magic blitz course. A week later, the boy, who had spent his whole life in Lel, went to Kaizen. Bidding farewell to her son, Lady and barely holding back her tears, said, "Please be careful." Charles, who could not hold back, exclaimed, "Have a safe journey, young sir." While continuing to teach magic, his father, who was riding with him in the carriage, said, "Direct the magical power that is in the space around you into your body and slowly begin to regulate mana. After that, push it through your core, and you can feel the mana getting stronger inside your body." Watching his son study, Richard said, "Now direct its flow into your hands." After releasing it from his fingers, the father was able to see the obvious result of his son's training in the form of a drop of mana on his finger. When the result was already visible to the naked eye, my father confidently said, "Great job, Simon! This is the main power of necromancers. This is the main difference between a necromancer and an ordinary magician. Mana is a kind of gas, which makes it able to dissolve in the air and also reduces its density. But darkness, on the contrary, is more like a solid or liquid body, which is why it is easy to use and change its shape. That's why, if you learn to use this property of darkness." Having created a small figure of his wife in his hand, his father added, "You can create even such a shape." The next moment, having created a magic circle in his hand, the father added, "People who train their power on the basis of darkness, they are the ones who can be called true necromancers. Given that you have quite a bit of time, now let's focus on the main releases of darkness into the core." To which Simon replied, "Well, looking at his attempts to create something out of the darkness, his father saw that he had finally started to make progress, even in such a short period of time." The next moment, when Simon really started to get something right, his father added in astonishment, "I can't believe it." Looking at the tree that his son Richard had just created, he added that it usually takes 6 months to 3 years to learn to create forms from darkness, but Simon was able to reach such an impressive level in just 3 days. Of course, I knew he was talented, but such talent can have its side effects, so I put off building his core, hoping that he would not repeat the mistakes of my youth. But right now, his talent is destined to blossom. Creating a blue flame out of the darkness in his hand, Simon joyfully said to his father, "Look at this." And he replied, "Wow! Midnight blue, that's what it is. Your darkness has a beautiful shade of blue." When Simon heard his father's praise, he asked happily, "Is it good that she has such a color?" "I have a rare case. I'm talented." In response to his son's encouraging questions, the father replied that it was just a beautiful color, which upset the boy. The next moment, the carriage stopped, and the coachman said, "We are here, sir." Hearing this, Simon was surprised to hear that they had already arrived at Kaizen. Hearing the words of his coachman, the father, getting out of the carriage, said, "No, this is the border of the kingdom of Aran. Now I will have to leave you." Hearing his father's words, the son nervously exclaimed, "In what sense, father?" Getting out of the carriage, the boy's father said, "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you earlier, but I can't visit the kingdom of Ariston. It's a long story. From this moment on, think carefully about your next step." Hearing these words from his father, Simon looked out of the carriage and said to his father, trying to reassure his son, Richard said, "Don't worry, son, you'll do better than anyone else. I'm really proud of you." After giving instructions and reassuring his son, the father remained in place to watch the carriage with his son drive off into the distance. 1 week later, in the kingdom of Arisan, after arriving in the town where Simon was supposed to transfer to the ship, the coachman told them that they had arrived. After looking around and seeing how many different people and even skeletons there were, Simon heard that this was the capital of the kingdom of Dresden, Lang Aaron. Having comprehended the beauty and scale of the city, the boy was amazed and said, "Wow, it's so impressive!" Opening a piece of paper with the address written on it, Simon looked around and said, "What a big city. You need to be careful about. Let's look at the taxi. It's 239 Kemmel Road. It says the guide is waiting for me there. I wonder where that is." Deciding to ask for directions from passers-by, Simon turned to the lady in front of him and exclaimed, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I ask you something?" Looking back, the lady with the eye that had fallen out replied, "What can I do for you, dear?" Trying not to show his fright, Simon held out the letter with the address and said, "I wanted to know how to get to this place." Hearing the boy's request, the girl said, "It'll be a minute." "Let me see," she said, stretching her eyes to see what it said. "It's Camel Road," pointing behind the guy's back. The girl said happily, "I saw a big square there. Go to it and turn right. You'll see a street covered with golden tickets. This will be Camel Road. It is one of the landmarks of Langeron." Hearing the information from the girl, the boy sighed nervously, immediately after bowing in gratitude. "Help," Simon said. "Thank you very much," to the lady, to which she happily replied with a fan. "Wow, what a polite boy." Waving goodbye to the young man who had gone in search, the lady happily said, "Good luck, and may he come with you to Langeron." After hearing the woman's wishes of good luck, Simon happily exclaimed, "Thank you, and good luck to you as well." Passing by Simon, who was looking for an address in the capital, a suspicious man approached the same woman and said, "Excuse me, ma'am," taking off his hat to greet her. The man added, "I'd like to ask you something." At the same time, the guide, who was waiting for Simon at the fountain in the square, said nervously, "Why did he take so long? I hope he didn't get lost," having found himself in a pleasant situation where he was attacked by robbers who pointed their guns and shouted, "Now empty your pockets." Simon thought, "I'm sorry, father." He was standing in the middle of a crowd of bandits who surrounded him and told him to give them his bag, his clothes, everything. Simon said in his head, "I might arrive in Kaizen a little later than expected." An hour earlier, when he arrived at the square where the guide was supposed to be, Simon looked around and repeated, 239, 239, over and over again. The next moment, approaching the confused boy, the man took off his hat and said, "You're headed to Camel Road 239. To which Simon replied, "That's right." "You must be my guide from HLE. The man said, "Yes, I'm your guide. I was sent by Hull. You're a little late, so I thought you might be lost and went looking for you." Shaking hands with the man, Simon said happily, "I'm very glad we met. My name is Simon Felina." And the man replied, "Nice to meet you. I'm Rowley, the guide to Langeron. Please follow me, and I will take you to the designated place. I'm very glad you didn't get into trouble before we met. There are a lot of scoundrels in Langeron who like to catch tourists." Leading the boy into one of these streets, which was also quite dark, the man added, "You know, pockets of kidnapping, illegal traders, and all that." To which Simon confidently said, "I know, and so that's why you also decided to make money off me." Hearing these words from the boy, the man froze in his tracks, smiling awkwardly. After Simon's question, the man said, "I don't know what you mean." And Simon replied, "You often look down at the sides. You also often check the contents of your vest's bottom pocket to make sure that an item hasn't accidentally disappeared from there, right? Judging by the shape of the folds on your clothes, you most likely have a dagger or a knife." When he heard the lead from the guy he was taking to the robbery site, the man nervously replied, "Don't get me wrong, it was just for self-defense." After which Simon added, "The name of Hull, isn't that the name of a goat in Lille?" When the man heard this lie identified, he nervously exclaimed that he was a goat. Feeling that his whole body was trembling with nervousness, the man exclaimed in surprise, "So, even knowing that I am not a guide but a bandit, you followed me?" Pulling the knife out of his pocket and waving it in front of him, the man nervously exclaimed, "Who are you anyway?" The next moment, a few dozen more people joined the robber, and then, feeling confident, he said, "But it doesn't matter anymore. Now you will beg us for mercy." Pointing the dagger at Simon, the man said with a sly smile, "Now empty your pockets, your bag, your things. Give them to me." When Simon heard the man's demand, he said, "I refuse to do it." Hearing the boy's words, the bandit standing behind Simon said, "Hey, you hillbilly! You must have misunderstood us." Rushing at Simon with a weapon to teach him a life lesson, the criminal shouted, "We didn't ask your permission." Actually swinging his knife, the man felt that he had missed, and Simon easily avoided the enemy's attack without even lifting an eyebrow. After the enemy's unsuccessful attempt to stab him, Simon grabbed the man's wrist and squeezed it, forcing him to drop his dagger. Squeezing the attacker's hand tightly to demonstrate his strength, the boy said sternly, "I have met many such people in our lands, scum who wander among good people and tear them to pieces. To protect the congregation, my duty as a descendant of a landowner is to eliminate such scoundrels who are engaged in bad deeds." When one of the bandits heard who they attacked, he shouted, "A nobleman! Now we will definitely not let you go." Immediately after his words, the man shouted, "Come out, everyone!" And then there was stomping, the sound of which only increased with time. Looking back to assess the situation, Simon mentally said, "I'm sorry, father. I'll probably have to arrive in Kaizen a little later than planned. The next moment, a woman's voice was heard among the crowd of men saying, I finally found you. I was waiting for you for so long that the terrifying stomp of the girl's heels, as she suddenly appeared in the dark street, attracted more and more attention from the robbers. And that's why I decided that I needed to go in search of you myself, so that it would be faster. When I saw that another strange person had arrived, the leader of the robbers said, Now what? Smiling happily at the boy she was supposed to meet, the conductor said, It seems that you have some business to attend to. Pointing to the girl who had come for Simon. The leader said, Don't worry, we have the advantage in numbers. To which the girl replied in surprise that she did. Using her necromancer magic, the girl confidently added, Do you even know what building is next to you? After calling a few dead people to speak for her, the girl added, A shop that sells skeletons. Come on, my subjects, take them. Seeing that the skeletons were up against them, one of the robbers nervously exclaimed to her, a necromancer. As soon as the subjects entered the battle, the band of robbers immediately lost their advantage and was defeated. Being at a disadvantage against the girl, the leader of the criminals frightenedly exclaimed, We did not recognize the great necromancer. Please have mercy. Hearing the man's request, the girl gave him a disdainful look and asked him, What group were you in? Hearing the question from the necromancer, the man shouted out in fright, Kewin. We are from the Kewin clan. To which the girl replied that the clan was too big for its members to steal from travelers. She commanded him to put his head down on the ground, put his hands behind his back, and crawl face first into the ground to the main headquarters to surrender in person, to which the bandit leader nervously replied, Have mercy! Hearing the bandit's request, the girl angrily said, You dared to order me. Either send someone in his place, or if his face is not too worn, your entire miserable clan will be wiped off the face of the earth in the name of kin. To which the bandit replied, I'm sorry, I'll remember your words. Having dealt with the enemies, the girl looked back to where Simon was standing and said happily, You must be Simon Felina, right? To which he replied, Oh yes, I thank you for your help, but who are you? Hearing the question from the boy, the girl pointed to herself and happily said, Do you think I am your real guide? Grabbing Simon's hand and pulling him along, the girl said, Come on, follow me. My mom has been waiting for us. Arriving in the seaside district, the girl looked for her mother and said, Well, where did she go again? I told her to wait for me here. The next moment, noticing her near the ice cream truck, the girl said, There she is. Approaching Nephis, the girl pointed at her and said menacingly, I told you not to go anywhere. To which she replied frightened, I was just waiting. Taking out a handkerchief to wipe away the ice cream on Neph's cheeks, the girl exclaimed angrily, You always get lost. Stop walking alone. In response to the scolding, Nephis pointed to the van and said that the man there offered free ice cream, to which the girl replied, What if you lost Simon because of that? What would have happened if I had executed you and him as well? Hearing this, Nephis immediately became upset, realizing her mistake. Looking at what was happening in front of him, Simon nervously thought that Nephis was her mother, not her younger sister, and then heard the girl ask, Are you going to apologize? To which Nephis replied, offended. Immediately after, to change the subject, Nephis turned to Simon, saying, Never mind. You must be tired from the road. Simon, I hope Richard taught you something useful? Hearing the witch's question, Simon said, Oh yeah, I learned this. And then created a blue flame of mana in his hand. Seeing it, Nephis said, Wow! It's been a long time since I've seen a shade of blue. Looking at the darkness created by Simon, the girl noticed that it still had the characteristics of mana. It looked like a flame, which meant that it was still in a liquid state. To which Nephis added, Well, for this, you will need to learn to use the core more effectively. He will learn this at school. Great. After demonstrating Simon's skills, Nephis happily said to her daughter, I trust you to guide the new student. I believe in you, my daughter. To which she replied, You always leave the hard work to me. While Nephis continued to enjoy the sweets, exclaiming, Ice cream! The girl approached Simon and said, Well, let me officially introduce myself. My name is Lorraine Erold, and I am a student at Kian, just like you. After the introduction, the girl grabbed the guy's hand and said happily, Now let's go. To which he confusedly exclaimed. Hearing the question from the confused boy, Lorraine happily replied, Of course. Shopping before the start of the new semester. Upon arriving at the first store, Lorraine excitedly asked Simon, Do you know what the best moment of the entire school year was? He replied that he did. Then the girl happily answered, That period of time when you go to buy new notebooks, books, clothes, and other things for school, and this period of time is coming right now. So you better enjoy it while you can to the fullest. First, we'll go to the textbooks. You'll need quite a few of them. Come with me. Following Lorraine, Simon said nervously. Okay. Taking one book from the bookshelf and handing it to the boy, Lorraine said, Take this one first. Looking at the book the girl gave him, Simon was surprised to read that it was An Introduction to Conscription by Ellery Moore Trinell. The next moment, another book with a voiceover by the girl came to the boy's hands, and he took this one as well. Stopping the incessant flow of books, Simon nervously asked the same question. In response to the question, the girl smiled happily and replied, Of course not. It's kin. You learn all these books in the first semester of your first year. Now, don't play the wimp here and get your books. Further in search of the books, Lorraine said, The last one will be a book on the dynamics of darkness. I'll go get it, and you stay here for now. To which Simon replied, looking around while his friend went to get a book. Simon mentally said, Well, what the hell? I had never seen so many people of my age in my life. Suddenly, a girl's voice behind him called out, She's here. Not paying attention to the road, the girl, not looking back, joyfully exclaimed, I'll bring it right away. When Simon saw a girl running toward him, he immediately moved out of her way to prevent her from hitting him, but that did not stop her from crashing into the bookcases, falling on her ass. After the collision, the girl grabbed her face and said, Oh, my nose! While several books from the top shelf fell on her. Seeing that she was in danger, Simon immediately ran to shield the girl with his body from the falling textbooks, shouting, Look out! Having saved the girl from danger, Simon asked her if she was okay, and she nervously replied, Oh, I'm sorry. It's my fault. He confidently replied, I was a little distracted myself. If you're not too busy, could you help me put the books back in their place, or we'll get scolded for this mess? The girl replied, Of course. Helping to put the books back in the places she had safely knocked down. The girl awkwardly said, Are you also a new student of Keen's? When she heard the positive response, she added, Oh, and my name is Cindy Vivas. And yours? Hearing the question from the girl, the guy smiled happily and answered, Simon Felina. To which he was glad to meet Simon. Gripping the book tightly, the girl said embarrassedly, I'm actually from the north, from Shackhead, so I don't have any friends yet. Surprised, Simon said, Then it turns out that we are very similar. I haven't managed to make friends with anyone here yet. Hearing this, the girl's eyes immediately lit up, and she exclaimed, That is true. When the girl got to her feet after the incident, she said uncertainly, Well, if you don't mind. Covering half of her face to hide her embarrassment, Cindy said, Can I say hello to you at school? When Simon heard the request from his new friend, he happily said, Of course. I wanted to ask you about it too. The girl happily exclaimed, Thank you. Having made friends with the new student of the academy, Cindy happily announced, I had already found all the books, so I should go. My dad is waiting for me outside. To which Simon replied, See you at school. By the way, Cindy, wait. When the girl stopped and looked back at Simon's request, he said, You don't want to return my wallet, do you? Plan to take it with you? Realizing that she had been caught red-handed, the girl exclaimed in confusion, I thought that if I used spiritual magic I would not be caught. But as you can guess, recalling exactly how he noticed that his wallet had been grabbed, Simon replied, Well, I saw it just floating in the air. To which the girl exclaimed in confusion. Starting to press her finger on Simon, the girl nervously exclaimed, You just noticed that? Are you mocking me, or do you also want to choose a specialized spiritualism? To which the guy replied confusedly, Well, I haven't decided yet. Looking down after the guy's vague answer, Cindy said, I knew it. The next moment, she looked up at Simon and exclaimed happily, Cass. This place is amazing. I can't believe it. It must be full of geniuses like you. I can't wait to start school. Simon said, Isn't that a lot of goals for a common thief? Jumping up and down on the spot, the girl exclaimed, If we both choose to major in spiritualism, we'll see each other for 3 years. Let's compete when the time comes, Simon. That's so cool. The next moment, after taking the stolen item from the boyfriend, Cindy threw it to the boyfriend and exclaimed, Here. Take your wallet. The next moment, using the magic of teleportation, the girl said goodbye. I can't wait to see you again, and feel free to come up to me at school. Some time after Cindy disappeared from the library, Lorraine came up to the boy and said disappointedly to Simon, They're out of all the copies of Introduction to the Dynamics of Darkness. And by the way, who was that girl? Have you already made friends? To which he awkwardly replied, something like that. Seeing the boy's nervousness when it came to Cindy, Lorraine smiled slightly and said, you don't have to be so shy with me. You can be honest, even if you like someone. Hearing this, Simon thought, yeah, I almost had my wallet stolen. The next moment she added, we're done with the books, and now it's time to deal with the bag. Hearing this, Simon was surprised to hear about the bag. Hearing the confusion in the guy's words as he looked at his bag, the girl said, oh, I don't mean this one. I mean the one used by necromancers. It's called a magical inventory, or simply put, a spatial pocket. Arriving at the store where they could buy a spatial pocket, visitors heard the owner's joyful voice. Welcome, Miss Lorraine. I was told that you had recently ordered a bag, so you must have been looking for one for this gentleman. To which the girl replied, he is new, so I needed a bag with the least restrictions. He doesn't need a model with walls and floors. We necromancers often fight in open spaces. To which the owner replied, Lady Lorraine, you are very perceptive. Taking one of the rings of the spatial pocket from under the counter, the owner handed it to Simon and said, in that case, I will personally show you a prototype that is not yet on sale. First, put the ring on and let the darkness fill it. Then you should feel something like a handle. Hearing the woman's instructions, Simon said, I understand. Having fulfilled all the shopkeeper's orders and achieved the desired state, Simon said, I feel like this. Then she said, now pull the lever. This spatial pocket is the latest development of the leading master, Galen Eclipse. The volume of the pocket is 4,000. The spatial pocket opens on the ground, regardless of the landscape. The space itself consists of 7 magic spells, including first-class protection and climate control spells. Moreover, this bag allows you to activate an invisibility spell to hide your location from enemies. Hearing about the 7 functions of the bag, Lorraine was surprised to hear that the ejection function was present, to which the owner replied, of course, it is also present here. After hearing about all the advantages of the new interdimensional pocket, Lorraine asked Simon if he liked it, and he replied, yes, I do, but it would be very expensive, wouldn't it? Then Lorraine joyfully exclaimed to Stephanie how much it would cost, and she joyfully replied, 5,000 gold. Hearing the price, Simon clutched his heart and thought, that's how many years it took to make Lash Hill's annual budget. Hearing the price, Lorraine approached the cash register and said, we'll take it. While Simon, who had just learned that she was buying it, nervously thought, are you serious? Immediately after buying the storage facility, Lorraine confidently said, not to worry, it's Mom's money. To which Simon was surprised to hear that it was Nephis. Then Lorraine replied, I don't know the details, but my mom owes your parents a lot of money, so she's just paying it back. Don't say no. To which Simon nervously replied, it's still a big gift. How can I repay Nephis? Hearing the boy's question, Lorraine said, offended, I don't even think about it. If you want to thank your mom, just study hard at Case Western. To which Simon confidently replied, I'll do my best. When Lorraine was done shopping, she left the store and said, thank you and goodbye. Once in the Sea Capital Square, she confidently said, now you have everything, let's have fun. To which Simon replied in surprise, what can I do? And she confidently replied, of course. This is part of our plan for today. After which the guy added uncertainly, okay. Arriving at the shooting tent, the girl bought a ticket to participate and handed the crossbow to Simon, saying, go ahead and knock out the plush toy. To which he replied, I'll try. After one attraction, they went for a walk and found themselves on a bridge, from which Lorraine pointed to one place and said, there is the highest point of the city, and this is a must-see attraction for tourists called the Thousand Lights. As you might imagine, Simon shrugged looking at the flashlight he threw into the sky and said, I'm only thinking about whether there are 1,000, out there who spend 200 silver pieces on burning paper. Marveling at the general appearance of the lanterns in the sky, Simon said, wow. To which Lorraine replied, you'll fit in perfectly in Kaizen. Then Simon said, thank you very much. Then the girl said sternly, it wasn't a compliment. But the boy added confusedly, okay. After launching the lanterns, Lorraine went with Simon to the seashore to a restaurant. When she saw the way he ate, she exclaimed in surprise, you know etiquette. You really are an aristocrat, aren't you? When Simon heard the girl's question, he said awkwardly, my father didn't calm down until he taught me the proper behavior at the table. Hearing this, Lorraine replied, you learned well. By the way, I'll tell you right away that 30% of Kaizen students are commoners, So don't even think about telling others what to do just because you're a nobleman. We have a meritocracy in Kaizen. To which Simon replied, I'll remember that. Then the girl added, tomorrow is the first day at the academy. Do you have any questions? Yes, that girl in the bookstore. She told me that I would need to choose a specialty and then mentioned her words in response. To which Lorraine told the faculty that this was a good question. In the first semester, you will study 9 subjects, 7 core and 2 additional subjects. In the second semester, you will be able to choose the ones you like and refuse those that do not interest you. In your second year, you will have to choose a major for yourself. Which Simon asked? Just like that girl? So I'll have to figure out which subject I have the most aptitude for? Lorraine said, I recommend that you find a few favorite subjects and concentrate on them. In Simon's imagination, it looked like everyone would come running to him and ask him to join them, and then he said, I'll definitely remember that. The next moment, Lorraine added, Have you thought about your major? To which the boy replied, I think I like the theory of conscription. What you showed me this afternoon was just amazing. When he heard what Simon was interested in, Lorraine answered that the theory of callings was a very good subject. It was quite a classic magic among the faculty of CIN. I don't know if you'll believe me or not, but it's Professor Hung Pang. To which the boy exclaimed in surprise, That him? Then the girl added, I can't even believe it myself from time to time. And there are professors among them. Simon interrupted the girl and said, I've been dreaming of seeing her. The girl added, Great. Let's get to the island. Stopping at a place near the hotel, the girl said, If Mom finds out that you came to class tired because of walking with me, she will beat me to death. Hearing that, it was time to say goodbye. The guy happily said, Thank you for everything. Which was quite interesting, to which Lorraine replied, Oh, come on. Trying to express all his impressions of the day, Simon happily said, I will remember this day for the rest of my life. To which the girl replied that it was really nice to hear. I'll be going then. She hadn't gone far when she suddenly looked back and said, By the way, Simon, I have something else I need to tell you. To which he replied in surprise, Yes, what is it? Then the girl said happily, Well, I wasn't going to deceive you. I wish I'd told you about it right away. Smacking herself on the head and smiling sweetly. Lorraine added, Well, I'm new too. Having put the guy in a state of shock, the girl pointed at him with her hands and said happily, Let's be friends. See you at school. Now bye. The next day, when he arrived at the pier and saw the other applicants leaving for the island, Simon was surprised to hear that everyone was so stylish. It seems that I'm the only one who looks ordinary here, he thought, hearing the announcement from the ship. Passengers come to the loading dock. We are leaving for the island of Kian. The boy thought. Lorraine said she would arrive on the island by another way, so we will now meet only at the academy. But why did they moor so strangely? As they usually moor with their noses toward the sea. After which Simon felt he had heard the documents in the normal way. Just as he was about to go on the deck of the ship, he heard a menacing shout from nearby. I'm telling you, it's a mistake. On another boarding line, one of the boys grabbed the conductor and shouted angrily. I'm the first on the waiting list, and you want to tell me that there is not a single student who refuses to study? So that's how you do things in __. Clenching his hand into a fist, the guy added, Contact the Kaizen administration. There's definitely some kind of mistake here. After seeing this performance, one of the applicants sighed heavily and said that every year there are always those who cannot accept the result, and he is also the first on the waiting list, so you can understand his despair. Pointing at himself, the bully angrily exclaimed, I am Lucius Carroll of the Earl of Arend. Contact the administration, I order you. To which he was answered, Please leave this place, you are not on the passenger list. The next moment, unable to contain his anger, Lucius Carroll grabbed the guide by the hair and pulled him toward him, exclaiming, How dare you! Intervening in the conflict and stopping the hand of the guy who was about to hit the ship's worker, Simon said, Stop it! Then the ruffian turned his gaze to the one who had prevented him from committing his massacre and angrily exclaimed, Who the hell are you? Let me go! Hearing the boy's threat, Simon only tightened his grip on the bully's arm and then saw him kneel down in pain and shout out angrily, You probably want to play the box. Earlier, when a voice asked from behind them what was going on, the next moment an old man descended from the ship, and upon seeing him, everyone exclaimed in surprise that it was Professor Silage. After inspecting the area and noticing who was causing the disturbances, the professor looked at Lucius menacingly and said the last words of the will. When a more important person came out to him, Lucius exclaimed, Please don't laugh. I'm just asking you to contact Nephis. I'm first on the waiting list. This result is a misunderstanding. Unable to bear the guy's impudence, the professor heard him exclaim, "You think you can treat me like this?" and snapped his fingers, instantly killing the guy without letting him finish. After dealing with the problem and heading back to the ship, Silage said, "We don't have time for this. Everyone on the ship, and you too." To which Simon replied, "Well." Having witnessed the murder of the boy, a crowd of onlookers said in surprise that it was the black magic of blood and that they would have lessons with him in the first year. Noticing that Simon was very nervous after what had just happened to the boy, the professor straightened his hat and said, "Don't worry, he's still breathing." When everyone was loaded onto the ship, Professor Silage spoke to the students. "I would like to ask everyone here to take their seats. The ship may go through turbulence, so do not leave your seats until you are ordered to do so." Sitting down in an empty seat in the cabin, Simon wondered how this ship sails. As long as the transport was enveloped in the magic of movement, the boy continued his thoughts, stern forward or otherwise. The next moment, all the students heard the voice of the sailor. "Professor, we will soon be there." To which he replied, "Stick to the route." When all the preparations were completed, the ship began to slowly rise and make a splash around it, and the students nervously exclaimed, "What is that wave noise? But isn't it too much noise for ordinary waves?" After which a giant wave rose behind the ship. A few seconds later, a giant whale emerged from that wave and flew straight toward their ship, jumping out of the water and swallowing the ship. The masters of necromancy and Kaizen have their own underwater servant, and this same servant is a dead whale who submits to the academy in order to bring students to the island. Realizing what had just happened to them, one of the students nervously said, "We're in the belly of a whale." To which the other replied, "I think so. This monster roams the ocean waters and will swallow any ship that necromancers point out to it. However, once a year, it fulfills its mission, namely delivering new students to the port of Kaizen. This is exactly what the Kaizen Academy's high-speed ship is after." Leaving the ship, one of the students was surprised to say that it was quite nice here, except for the fact that we are now in the stomach of a whale, and it seems that people live here. Also, after leaving the deck with all the students, Simon suddenly heard a boy address him, saying, "You didn't miss a beat." As soon as he paid attention to him, the boy added, "Despite the conflict situation, you tried to calm him down with words." Simon replied awkwardly, "Nothing special." After expressing his impressions, the boy shook hands with Simon and said, "I'm also applying to Kaizen. My name is Rowan." To which he replied, "Nice to meet you. I'm Simon Felina." Having met his new friend, Rowan asked, "By the way, how did you pass the entrance exam?" Simon asked confusedly, "What kind of exam?" In response to Simon's question, Rowan answered, "The introductory. I gave my form to the darkness." Hearing this, the guy was nervous, thinking, "I had no exam. Nepus just came and stuck me a letter about my enrollment. But if I tell him this, he will be offended that I was hired on a whim." Then he nervously said, "I also took the same exam with the same darkness." To which Rowan replied, "What a coincidence." The next moment, the loudspeakers announced that the students were asked to board and take their seats. Soon, hearing this, Simon was surprised to hear that Rowan answered, "Himes, the speed is incredible." When everyone took their seats and boarding began, the ship's management announced, "Dear students, we are entering a turbulence zone, so please remain seated. Do not stand up for your own safety, rather hold on to the railing on the ship and get ready for a shake." Having survived all the adventures on the way to Kaizen, the professor, after stopping the ship and opening the exit door, announced, "We have arrived on the island." When everyone left the ship and headed for the island, 2 giant guards met the students at the entrance and told them to line up in 4 lines, as we were about to hand out uniforms. "So everyone who has received a uniform, please continue to the men's locker room to the right, women's locker room to the left. You all have 5 minutes to change, after which we ask you to leave without delay." After changing his everyday clothes to the Kaizen uniform, Simon looked at his appearance and thought happily. His father was right. It was a very stylish uniform, and he would not be ashamed to wear it to the ball. After changing into his uniform and leaving the locker room, Simon walked down the hall and heard the jacket enchanted by the Academy's uniform, which was good for magical combat and stronger than armor. Then the voice of the staff said, "Come on out, let's go on," moving to the common room where the girls were also present. Simon saw the fairer sex and thought to himself, the girls' uniforms look much more beautiful. The next moment, the staff's voice was heard again. "Well, everyone's here, so let's go to the auditorium." As he was getting ready to go to the classroom, he suddenly heard Simon behind him saying, "What are you doing?" He was surprised to hear Rowan say that. Immediately after stretching his arms up, the guy happily exclaimed, "Simon, I can't believe we're really in Kaizen. This is definitely not a dream." To which he replied, "Don't worry, it's not a dream. Oh, by the way, Rowan, what about all these students? Are they new?" Hearing the question from his colleague, Rowan confidently answered, "Of course. There are 1,000 students in the first year alone." To which Simon was surprised to hear that there were 1,000. Continuing the story, Rowan added, "And by the way, in the second year, there will be about 300, and in the third year, less than 150. To which Simon exclaimed in surprise, trying to tell his friend more about this place. Rowan added, "That out of 1,000 enrolled students, only 30% will continue to study in the second year, so this is the kind of atrocious selection that's going on here." "Oh, that's right. By the way, that's not all. There are also students you need to know about in advance." Pointing to a girl who was sitting not far from them, Rowan said, "There's Suna Ar, the heiress to the ivory tower." After pointing to a couple of other people, he added, "Some more rising stars, Darwin Carine over there, and Jay Sanders behind him." The next moment, pointing at a healthy guy sitting in front of them, Simon asked, "Who was that?" Rowan replied that he was the one he was talking about. Realizing who his interlocutor was interested in, Rowan added, "A large yes. I know him, Chatelmayer, half-giant. Probably he will go to the specialty of combat magic. And on this side there's a girl, she's just the best in our stream." Simon turned his gaze to the one pointed out by his friend and asked in surprise, "The best?" Pointing to a girl nearby, Rowan said, "Lorraine Arkal. Thought she would be admitted on special terms because she was the only daughter of Nephis, but I heard she passed the entrance exams and got the highest marks. It did not even take second place among those tested, but everyone already knows that it is the best." The next moment, a representative of the academy appeared on the stage and said, "Attention students! We will now begin the enrollment ceremony. Congratulations to all the students enrolled here. You should soon become the pride of Kian. In conclusion, we expect the best results from you, and you 7 are strictly forbidden to go to the forest. Now we'll introduce you to the faculty." After the teachers appeared on stage, someone from the audience exclaimed, "Wow, they're all top-class active necromancers." Unable to contain his emotions, Rowan joyfully exclaimed, "I've only seen them all in the newspapers until now." While greeting fans among the newly arrived students, one of the teachers heard, "Professor Buckle, look at me." Looking around the faculty, Simon said in surprise, "I don't understand why Nephthys isn't here." Hearing the question from Comrade Rowan, our rector answered him, "Our rector does not come to ceremonies for some freshmen. If you see her in the third year, you are lucky." Immediately after the staff spoke, the representatives now swore an oath for everyone to stand up. Upon hearing this, Simon asked if the ceremony was over. When he heard the question from his friend, Rowan confidently answered, "The 2 best representatives from the girls and boys come out and say the oath, and then that's it." After announcing that the first of the girls is Suna Andar, the staff went on to name the number 1 student who was accepted under special conditions, Simon Fenna. "Simon Fenna is here." As Simon walked to the podium to take the oath, the rest of the students were talking in surprise, looking at him and saying, "Who doesn't know him? I've never heard of him, this number 1 guy." Seeing the nervous look on the boy's face, Suna Andar said, "Don't worry, just read it out loud," to which he replied, "Well." After receiving the letter with the oath, a couple of the best students said that they swore that they would enter the academy. After the oath was pronounced, Simon took his seat and nervously thought that Kian was a really serious academy. "I did not expect that we would start 14 classes for 1,000 students on the same day, and that each classroom would be completely full." Trying to somehow calm down as he listened to the words behind him, "This guy is accepted on special terms. Never heard of him, never heard of him. What family? He seems to be from Felina," Simon nervously thought. "They are talking about me. It's only the first lesson, and I'm already on pins and needles, so I need to calm down. Let's see how many more lessons we have today. Oh, we're going to have a draft theory today, which means it's the same magic that my father has mastered perfectly." Remembering his father in the moment when skeletons were called up to help the workers, Simon mentally added, "If I study hard, I will become like my father." When the first lesson began, the teacher entered the classroom and took his seat. For some people, necromancy is associated with some strange figures wearing dark cloaks and digging up graves under the cover of night. However, this is all in the past. Modern necromancers are smart, stylish, pragmatic, and in step with the times, and these are the necromancers of the new generation. Bahil Amgar, a professor of curse theory for the first year, is a young professor of necromancy. At the age of 27, he has already joined the Raven Squad, the main squad of Kaizen martial artists, and all the students simply adore him. Taking off his jacket for convenience, the teacher said, "Good afternoon, students. I will be your first curse theory teacher. My name is Bahil Amagar, so let's take a roll call. This is a great opportunity for all of us to get to know each other, so as I call your name, introduce yourself to the class. So let's start with Jamie Victoria," and when she heard her name, she immediately jumped up and down and exclaimed, "I'm so glad to meet you, Professor. I would like to go to school as a curse maker like you." Bakel interrupted the girl, "But wait, don't introduce yourself to me. Start with your classmates." Hearing the teacher's remarks, the girl awkwardly said, "Oh well, I'm Jamie Victoria," and at this rate, the turn came to our protagonist, who rose from his seat and said, "My name is Simon Felina. I'm from Lille." After which voices in the audience said, "I found the one who was accepted on special terms." At the same pace, many students introduced themselves, and the turn came to another guy, Hector Moore, who stood up from his seat. When the class presentation was over, the professor rolled up his shirt sleeves and said, "You are all just incredible. So, let's get started with our lesson. From the very beginning, we will ask ourselves the fundamental question of why we need, writing on the board the question they would be discussing." Bill added that they needed a theory of curses at all. "Who will tell me what a curse is?" Hearing the question, Jamie's hand immediately raised, and he exclaimed, "Jim's curse is a type of dark magic that allows you to feed off the strength of an opponent, while weakening him." To which the teacher answered, "Just fine, Jamie." The next moment, raising his finger in front of him to focus the student's attention, Bahil said, "I don't think all the students can imagine this, especially when it comes to weakening." The opponent went up to the board and started to draw an example to explain. The teacher said, "I'll give you an example now." Having finished the drawing on the board, he pointed to one of the fighters and said, "We have two knights with the same skills and level, and so they begin their fierce battle, exhausting each other. One of them waits for the moment when the other makes a mistake. About 20 strikes have already been made on both sides, but neither side wants to give in. It was at that moment that one of the knights looked at his opponent with bloodshot eyes and shouted a curse. Hearing the curse from the opponent who had just cast it on him, one of the knights shuddered and turned pale. Finally, when the opportunity presented itself, the sword pierced his shoulder. After that, the first blood was shed in the fight, and the opponent's movements became less and less accurate. Continuing to actively draw an adaptation of the example of the curse, Bakel added a knight grasping for a chance to win. He continued his attack until his opponent was cornered and stabbed him in the leg. After that, he grabbed a handful of sand and threw it in his eyes, striking the opponent's helmet flat to stun him. Then the battle took on a completely new, desperate character. Finally, the moment of climax in the fight arrived. The knight chopped off his opponent's head, and it fell rapidly to the ground. After completing the story with a detailed customization of all his words, the professor asked, "So, now you understand that even a barbaric sword fight?" Having attracted the attention of all the students with an interesting presentation of information, the professor said that there is a series of actions that are hidden to exhaust the enemy and gain the upper hand. Taking the chalk in his hands again to explain everything in detail, Bakil said, "I will show you how the battle of modern necromancers takes place." Having drawn a model of an ordinary person from sticks in a circle on the board, he pointed to them and said that, in order to defeat a person, a necromancer needs to defeat a person. He added one more line to indicate the direction of the attack and then made just one simple movement, after which he easily defeated his opponent, followed by enthusiastic shouts from the audience. As he continued to practice at the blackboard, Bill said, "A curse is the simplest and most inexpensive formula among the dark arts, and another key to its effectiveness. In addition, an indicator of effectiveness is how much you can hit the enemy with only a small amount of effort." Immediately after these words, the professor approached one of his students who was sitting in the front desk. Taking him by surprise, the teacher Beal created a magic circle that cast a curse. Using a curse on one of his students, he managed to knock him unconscious and then reached for his weapon, holding out a dagger from his bag. The teacher smiled ominously and said, "This is how modern necromancers fight." After an incredible show of necromancer skills, the professor bowed, and the audience shouted, "Incredible, Professor! The theory of curses is the best." At the end of the enchanting show, the teacher snapped his fingers and said, "I don't know what specialty you will choose, but I can assume that more than 80% of you will choose my subject in the second semester." Meanwhile, a happy Simon, who saw the beauty of curses, heard that the theory of curses goes well with other types of magic. "I always approve of my students choosing a subject that is closer to their hearts and cursing their enemies at every opportunity." Turning back to the blackboard and picking up the chalk, the professor said, "There is no shorter path to victory than this. I believe that the theory of curses is the heart of modern necromancy, and the reason for this is that the priest of the curse theory is a must-have science for those who want to confront our natural enemies. The next moment, turning to face the audience, Professor Bakil spoke and told them what would happen if necromancers had the art of cursing with them and the priests had their divine power of blessing. However, the difference is that a curse takes away strength, while a blessing restores it. So, it is restored. Who can explain to me what is the advantage of curses over blessings? As soon as the question was asked, a hand was raised in the audience, and a girl shouted out, "Jamie Victoria!" A curse is much faster to cast than a blessing, and that is why the cumulative effect of many casts will produce results faster. But fortunately, she was wrong. When she heard that she had made a mistake, the girl immediately became quiet and froze in place, not receiving an answer to her question. Bakil said, "Scholars agree that the curse cast is slowed down by the object's resistance to magic, and that is why it is faster by a small percentage than the speed of the blessing cast." Well then, who else might know the answer to my question? Then I saw another hand in the audience rising from his seat. The disciple said, "Hector Moore! The fragility of the human body helps the one who curses." After hearing the answer that satisfied him, the teacher said, "What's your name again?" To which Hector Moore replied, "I'll remember it." After receiving a satisfactory answer from the student, Professor Amgar said, "Hector is correct in saying that spells that weaken the opponent cannot be repelled by the added art. All people learn magic in their normal state, not even realizing that they may be sick or injured at the time of battle. The mage's well-being also affects his effectiveness in battle. If the environment does not negatively affect him, then these are ideal battle circumstances. However, the human body is much more fragile than we can imagine, and even a small change for the worse can weaken it. Well, let's say that your opponent is an archer. You don't have to cut off his arm to neutralize him. You can simply give him conjunctivitis, which will make it difficult for him to see, and it will also make him nauseous, affecting his sense of distance, so that he stops distinguishing it. You can also make him distracted by something else. With all these various actions, you can avoid being hit by his arrow. The main thing I want to tell you is that necromancers have many different ways to make their opponent feel worse. For example, if you are very tired and have a stomach ache, you will not come to my class, and that is because you are simply not in a position to learn. Of course, you will most likely just lie in your room all day long. Remember, leaving the chalk and approaching the students again, the professor added that we should think about ways to weaken others more than ways to make ourselves stronger. The next moment, assistants entered the classroom with cash register kits, and then the teacher said, "Now, when the curse casting kit is given to each student," Bill Amgar said, "we will learn how to cast curses." When Simon heard what they were going to be doing, he thought, "Wow, from the very first lesson we are learning dark magic." The next moment, the professor remarked that it should be a disgrace for Kian's students to use a spell stencil, but this was the first lesson, so they would have to. It is good to use the stencil from the very beginning to memorize the magic circle, but I do not advise you to abuse it. You must rely on memory when casting. Let's start with a spell of exhaustion. Everyone, grab the handles of your stencils and pour your darkness into the mold. The key to a successful drawing of a magic circle is the perfect correctness of the runic writing. Runes are an alphabet with magical properties. Drawing runes with the help of your own darkness leads to the manifestation of their magical effects. If any of you have already created a magic circle, try to lift it into the air. When Simon heard this, he filled the stencil with darkness and raised the magic circle, exclaiming, "I did it!" Immediately afterward, he heard voices around him exclaiming, "Oh, me too!" When Simon heard this, he was surprised to hear that so many people had succeeded. After a few seconds, the professor walked among the students and said, "I see that some of you have lost your magic circles. Don't worry, this happens when you have not cleared your darkness or the binding force has weakened. Try again, and for those who already know how to hold a magic circle in the air, I'd like to ask you to try using a spell. Look carefully at your set of magic. Each of you has been given a house plant." As he continued to drift around the room, reviewing the progress of his students, Bahil said, "Look at him and apply the curse. If, as a result, you get a visible negative effect on the plant, it means that everything worked properly." Turning his attention to Simon again after Hector Moore, the teacher added, "I see that the difference in your abilities is enormous. When you have succeeded in the spell, try again. Only this time, increase the speed. When the speed is sufficient for you, then try to draw a circle without a stencil." At the same time, failing time and time again, Simon bowed his head and nervously wondered, "What is wrong with me?" Looking at how others were already practicing the rapid use of curses, he mentally added, "Why am I the only one who is so slow?" What am I doing wrong that I'm not succeeding? What a misfortune! As he reflected on his mistakes, Simon suddenly remembered the words of Lorraine, who had said, "Looking at his flame, but its darkness is like manna. It radiates tongues like flames because it is still half gaseous." After which, Nephis added, "Well, it's okay. He'll learn how to control the core. He'll learn everything at the academy, so that's fine." Recalling the words of his friends, the boy confidently said in his head, "That's right. I haven't learned how to control mana and darkness yet. Nephis and Lorraine said so. To achieve the result, I have to start with the basics. Professor Bahil said that the problem is either the purity of the darkness or the power of the binding, so I will try to concentrate as much mana as possible from the environment first, and then send it all to the Khalil at once. Now it's darkness, and now it's much more stable then. Well, now create and cast a spell before the magic circle breaks down." The next moment, the boy used a magic circle and finally managed to exhaust the plant with a curse, after which a pop sounded, and the teacher said, "That's it." Breathing out a sigh of relief that he had made it to the end, Simon said, "If anyone else didn't make it, you can practice his homework, and the rest of the time we have left, we will devote to using the curse on living people." Simon said in confusion, looking through the list of students in his journal. The teacher said happily, "I see that we have student number 1 who is enrolled on special terms." Simon Felina walked up to the board, feeling the stares and voices of his classmates saying, "This is the one special. Wow. Must be from a really gifted." Simon nervously said, "Well," continuing to look for more interesting students in his journal. Bakel added, "Who could be a worthy rival for such a brilliant student? Now I will look among the students with the highest scores in the final exam." Having called Hector more against him, the professor said, "So, these are the rules. I allow only one exhaustion spell to be cast. Create a circle for this spell and cast it on enemies. The first one to kneel or hit the ground is the loser." When both participants received their magic kits, Hector said, "Professor, I'm going to make a magic circle without a stencil." Hearing these words from his student, the teacher smiled happily and said, "Well, that's a good mood." At the same time, Simon was not laughing at all, looking at his opponent and thinking that this big guy looked quite smart despite his bear-like appearance. The teacher, who announced the duel, recalled his words. "Actually, for Kian students, using a stencil should be a disgrace, but this is the first lesson, so it will have to be." After mentioning this, he smiled slightly and added, "I pointed out that it was shameful to use a stencil." And he immediately decided to show that he was better than the others. The next moment, he turned his gaze to another student and said, "Oh, Simon," to which he replied, "I'm going to make a magic circle with a stencil." Hearing this, the teacher announced, "Well, if you wish, then you can start by my sign, and good luck to both of you." When Simon heard that the competition had started, he nervously thought about filling the stencil with darkness. "Don't be nervous, do what you did a few minutes ago. You can do it again." But suddenly he felt some kind of weakness in his body and blurred eyes, and then he said, "This can't be." Seeing the first step already made, Hector exclaimed, "Well done, Hector! How fast and without a stencil." Then Simon thought, "I've already made it. I already feel very tired from my spell, and I already understood what the professor was talking about. But I'm almost ready. I just need to get the circle in the air." As Simon continued to try to perform the spell, he saw that his magic circle had collapsed, and thought it would not work, even if the caster tried again. Watching Hector move perfectly, Jimia Victoria nervously told him to go away for the 5th spell, asking, "And why was he called number 1 when he couldn't even do one spell?" Continuing to hold on to his legs with the last of his strength, Simon heard the words, "You look miserable." Preparing to strike the 6th blow with the spell of exhaustion. Hector said, "You really want me to finish the job?" Hector is definitely a nugget, not only talented but also behaving like a true adept of necromancy. Kaysen will be an excellent student and will definitely make it to the 3rd year, and this one, who was admitted on special terms, has neither theoretical training in the dark arts nor any experience in resisting magic. Watching Simon closely, Bakil added that he was curious why Nitas chose him. This year, only 4 students were admitted without a difficult entrance exam, and only the talent of the century is admitted on such conditions, especially those who are called number 1 among them. Usually it was a personal choice of Nephthys, and such a student eventually grew into a rather large person. However, for some reason, I don't see any potential in him, except for his resistance to magic. At his age, students fall to their knees after the 4th spell, but this is the 9th, and he still keeps standing. He still tries to make the drawing of the magic circle correct, although it takes him a lot of effort to even stand upright, and his willpower is to be commended. However, this would rather impress a professor of combat mania who values resilience and endurance in a person, and his abilities have nothing to do with my subject. Oh, he's really finally raised his magic circle. Interestingly enough. Gathering his thoughts and strength, Simon was finally able to apply his skill to the exclamation of exhaustion. Feeling the effect of Simon's cast, Hector immediately sat down on the ground but held himself up with his hand and thought in confusion. Exhaustion cannot be so depressing. In training, I have never felt this way. He's kidding. I can't lose to a cast alone. I have the advantage on my side. Now I'm going to finish this. Rising to his feet again, Hector used the exhaustion skill, after which Simon dropped the stencil and fell to his knees. After which, the teacher declared the match over, and Hector Moore won. You did a great job, guys. Great demonstration. After which he snapped his fingers and removed the curse effects, to which Simon tiredly replied, Thank you. Noticing something unusual in the fight, Professor Bahil Amgar patted the ground and said, That's it for today's lesson. When everyone was heading for the exit, one of the students ran up to the teacher and happily said, Professor, I have a question about today's topic. To which the professor interrupted her and said, Wait a minute. You'd better come to my office after school, and I'll answer all your questions. The girl happily exclaimed, Thank you very much. Then the teacher smiled slightly and bit the tip of his tongue, saying, I can't waste my time on useless groupies. The only spell Simon cast was worth more than all of Hector's casts combined. Incredible power. A genius like him is simply obliged to be a cursor by profession at the same time taking the plant with him. Simon said heavily, I'm so tired. To which she added, I am too. When Simon went outside to a cafe, he took a drink and immediately laid down and groaned heavily. After catching his breath, he said tiredly, Why are all the lessons so exhausting? And the boy replied, Because you are number one admitted on special terms. When Simon heard this, he was surprised and asked what it had to do with anything. The guy replied that in K, there was a lot of competition, not only among students but also among teachers. Professors with bad grades can be fired right in the middle of the semester, and some may have their salaries reduced. But those who have good performance get a lot of influence in keynote. To this, Simon said, What are you talking about? Then the boy added that all teachers want only the best students for the best monthly results. Just imagine how it feels to have the number one student in their class. To which Simon grabbed his head and said tiredly, In short, this is the reason why every teacher called me to the board and tested my abilities. Seeing that his friend was starting to get the point, the guy added, Oh, and by the way, that girl was your rival. Then Simon asked how Min Wan was doing, and his friend replied that she was the best student in the class. So you know how highly you are valued when you are pitted against such a student. When Simon heard this, he said in disappointment, But I couldn't defeat her once, and I only managed to cast one spell on Hector. His friend answered, Exactly. That puzzled the professors who thought you were a genius and didn't realize that you were still learning. After listening to his friend's explanation, Simon raised his head from the table and said, Thank you for explaining everything to me, by the way. But you are the one who explained it. When he heard Simon's question, the boy immediately jumped up and down and nervously exclaimed, You're cold as ice. We've all introduced ourselves to the class. In class, I'm Dick Hayward. We're both in the same class. In response, Simon said awkwardly, I'm sorry, there are just so many students though. Dick replied, But tell me, how do you like studying here? It seems like people are talking about you. He heard back, probably because special number one didn't live up to their expectations. Then he heard, Bugaloo, don't pay attention, you're a normal level for a beginner. I don't understand why there's so much noise. It's only the first day of school. It's only lunchtime, and you look so exhausted. To which Simon replied, I used all my stamina in Beale's lesson. Then Dick heard, Oh yeah, 10 casts of exhaustion must be terribly exhausting. What he heard in response, however, was that Simon even liked it. It was very interesting. The lessons are quite difficult but very interesting in all of them. Hearing what the first number had just said to him, Dick approached him and said, You're a strange one, Simon. I have to talk to you. Hector is already starting to recruit his gang. When Simon hears this, he is confused and asks, What gang do you mean? Then Dick added that he had impressed many people in box class, and so people immediately began to gather around him to be his friends. He was the eldest son of a famous noble family, so it was no surprise that he would be popular among the nobility. Hearing the warning from his new friend, Simon said in an indifferent tone, I don't really care about that. Hearing Simon's reaction, Dick immediately approached him and nervously exclaimed, Get a grip on yourself. In K, politics also plays a significant role. Do you at least understand what will happen if the whole A class is under his pressure? Any student he dislikes will be isolated and will be haunted by academic failures. For example, he will not be able to find friends to do his homework in a group. Hearing this, Simon said thoughtfully, Dick, you seem to be a good man and know a lot about social life, so why did you come to me and not to Hector? Hearing this, the boy said awkwardly, Oh, well, I'm not a nobleman myself, but the son of a shopkeeper. When Simon heard the reason why he picked on him, he was surprised to hear that. I had heard that everyone in K was equal, he nervously replied. That is true, but noble children still do not miss the opportunity to boast of their advantages. To which Simon replied, I do not do that. Then Dick said in surprise, That indeed. I have just one suggestion for you. Standing up and pointing to himself, Dick confidently exclaimed, Join my gang. Even if you don't know much and people despise you, you are still number one among those accepted on special terms. Those who are now bragging about how they excelled in the preparatory courses are in vain, as the difference between them and the other participants is leveled over time, and Nephis could not have chosen you for no reason. The next moment, pointing his finger at Simon, Dick confidently exclaimed, I am convinced that you have talents that even you do not suspect. After listening to everything he was told, Simon's friend stood up and said, I don't know about joining the gang. Stretching out his hand to his friend and smiling happily, the guy said, But maybe we'll just become friends. When Dick heard the first number's proposal, he fainted and then said nervously, You better not say those words in K. I'm all over the place. After some thought and shaking Simon's hand, Dick said, It's nice to have a friend, to which he replied, We'll be friends then. After establishing new friendships, the guy nervously said, I need to hurry to class. Then Simon asked, I see, and what kind of ODI? He added, Oh, I'll find it now. The next person to hear what they were doing next, Simon immediately blossomed and exclaimed that it was true. Remembering my father and his skills, the first number mentally said, I can definitely learn to summon the dead like my father. As Simon entered the classroom, he could hear the dissatisfied voices coming from the audience, and he was the first to go. The biggest disappointment in Kyan's history, you have to put him above Chatel, Lorraine, and Cerna, which is complete nonsense. Trying to console his friend about the talk in the classroom, Dick said, Don't pay attention to them. They're just posers, to which Simon replied happily. I was in anticipation, turning his head to the first number. The guy saw him happily saying, I can't wait for the lesson on the theory of recruitment, to which he said, Some strange guy. When Simon heard this from his friend, he was surprised to hear me say, Yes, and then he added, I've never been told that before, and I think they will say it more than once. The next moment a man entered the classroom, and when the students looked at him, they were surprised and began to say, Who is this? Isn't this the teacher? He looks like an ordinary man. At the same time, the teacher had already reached his teaching table and leaned on it with a tired sigh. Immediately after looking up at the students, he said, I am Aaron Day, your first conscription theory teacher. The history of summoning has historically been the basic science of necromancy. Most do not want to admit it, but we necromancers first came out of the milieu of undertakers, grave robbers, and necrophiliacs. If you are not deaf, you have certainly heard something about the draft dead. It is outdated, has a bad reputation, is difficult to understand, or has many flaws. Tilting his head slightly downward, the teacher added, All these premature beliefs are mostly true. Hearing this, the students were surprised to think what this man was saying, as if he were not a professor at all. And then Aaron Day added that you probably liked all the other subjects. Up to this point, they were presented attractively, and many of you were thinking about what specialty to go into. However, I am against such techniques, and I'm in favor of every teacher talking about the advantages and disadvantages of their subject right away, so as not to mislead you. So here's the first drawback of the call. Upon hearing this, the class was surprised to think that he started right away with the drawback. Continuing his lesson, Aaron said that no matter how much you imagine the amount of money you will have to spend, it will actually be much more expensive. You will have to spend more on practicing summoning magic than on all other subjects combined. Educational items are a must-have. We cannot afford to kill people or animals due to the inability to purchase substitutes these days. Skeleton kits and processed cadavers are available, and each is only good for one time. This business is costly, and you will have neither reward nor pleasure from this magic. So those who go into the specialty can forget about wealth. The second disadvantage is that they will fight instead of you, and of course, the outcome of the battle depends on their strength. When your hidden creatures fail you, you take 80% mana damage. This is also related to the first disadvantage. For example, nowadays there are relatively long-lasting models of the dead available. Imagine what would happen if you raised such an undead and killed it. Then you're not only out of commission, but you've also spent a lot of money, and the battle continues, and you can only helplessly watch your teammates cope with the task. And finally, the third drawback is the most important one here. The priests are much stronger than you in any case. But I will even say this, in today's realities, necromancers cannot compete at all. The only opportunity for a necromancer summoner to prove himself is at war, at the front. The summoner has no shortage of targets for conscription. On the battlefield, there are always many dead. However, after the conclusion of the non-aggression pact, the hostilities took on the character of local conflict for small-scale military skirmishes. Spiritualists are perfect as spellcasters, and necromancers are definitely weaker than priests. One sacred priest spell, and your entire undead regiment is defeated. How much time and money do you think you'll need to collect a new one? There are quite a few shortcomings, but the choice is yours. The next moment a hand appeared in the audience, and Jamie Victoria exclaimed, "Professor, I'm Jamie Victoria. Please tell me, what are the advantages of conscripts?" Angered by the student's impatience, Aaron said angrily, "I don't think I have allowed you to ask questions yet," to which the girl nervously said, "Oh, forgive me." The next moment the teacher said the advantages were a huge number of tactical options, and the ability to conduct various operations with the help of summoned creatures. After announcing the advantages and disadvantages of his subject, the teacher added, "It's up to you to decide whether you want to study conscription theory in the second semester, but I want you to keep in mind, if you don't have the guts, don't even think about approaching this discipline. If you're going to cry and beg off for something like that or come up to me in the middle of the second semester asking me to change my major because you don't have enough money, so don't even think about going into the specialty of conscripting the dead. I don't need your nudity here, and with those who will think about going into my specialty only because of the lack of competition, I have a short conversation." Hearing this, one of the assistants who arrived was displeased and said he was calling him out. Continuing his harsh speech, the conscription teacher added, "I will simply get you expelled, that's all." When the assistants handed out the kits for the first lesson, the teacher said, "You have a skeletal set of island cesses in front of you." When Simon opened the set and saw the stacked bones, he felt their skeleton was similar to a human's but simpler and cheaper. This is a suitable object for training beginner necromancers. While the assistants were hanging the poster, the teacher said, "On the board, you see a drawing of the finished skeleton and the number of bones. So if everyone is ready, then start by taking out the number 1 bone from the set, which is the skull." The skull, by the way, was already assembled. When one of the students started the practical part of the lesson and nervously picked up the skull, he said something nasty, to which he was told that the bones were very clean. A little later, the teacher added a skull and put a finger in the sockets. On the back of the skull cap is a magic circle stencil. Put your fingers in the sockets and form a magic circle. After following all the instructions, Simon looked inside and said, "Oh, really? There is a stencil for a magic circle on the inside of the bone, so I'll try it now." At the same time, the teacher continued, "When you finish forming the magic circle." But before he could finish, he heard a shout from the audience. With a sigh of mockery, Aaron Day said, "Oh, I didn't have time to tell you so you wouldn't be scared. It activates the undead. But since I see that it's too late, well, it's okay if it is." When Dick saw that Simon had calmed down his undead and was not even afraid, he asked Simon what he had to do with undead, to which he replied that he had seen them often from the outside. To calm the noise in the classroom, the teacher tapped his hand on the table and exclaimed, "Get used to it, you necromancers or whatever. When you activate the magic circle, the summoning of the dead is almost complete. The creature cannot move yet, which is why you must construct a skeleton for it. The necromancer must know the structure of the summoned creature's skeleton by heart. The human skeleton has an average of 206 bones, while the piper has only 53, so it is a much easier target. First, find the 2 cervical spines and attach them to the skull. A summoned skeleton always has a desire to take its normal form, so if you don't confuse the bones, the assembly process will be simple," to which Simon exclaimed, "I understand." Continuing the instruction, the teacher said, "Now take the 3rd and 4th, and so on up to the 11th. Just be careful not to confuse the sequence of the spine. Island ice fish or upright walking animals, so it is very important to assemble the spinal column correctly. If you mix up something in it, you will greatly reduce the ability of your undead to walk without twisting. The right sign that you have made a mistake will be a clear creaking of the bones. At the crucial moment, your cold may simply crumble, and now go to number 16. By this time, some of the students had already managed to assemble the skeleton completely. Continuing to guide the students in assembling the skeleton, Aaron Day said, "We're almost done now, up to the 53rd. If anyone is having trouble, raise your hand. As soon as he asked about the problems, many students raised their hands and started shouting, Professor, I can't attach my leg. Professor, my skeleton is running away. At the same time, Simon, having finished the assembly, sighed with joy and said, I created the first skeleton with my darkness. The next moment, he heard his name being shouted. Looking over at the noise, Simon heard Dick say, Please look at why he's rearranging his own arm and leg bones. Pointing out the problem in the build, Simon said it was because he mixed up his dice, and he was trying to fix it, to which he replied in surprise that he was pointing to the instructions. Simon added, Look, number 21 is for the leg, not the arm, to which Dick replied, Oh, they are the same. How can you tell? At the end of the time for practice, the teacher said, For today, the practice of assembling skeletons is complete, and we will devote the rest of the lesson to demonstrations. Simon Fenna, please come to the podium, and I would like to invite Hector Moore to the podium as well. When both boys came out in front of the class, the teacher said, We have 10 minutes left. During this time, you have to collect the skeletons and use it to take this necklace, and the one who can get it before the bell rings will win. It is forbidden to reach for the necklace and use black magic yourself. Everything else is within the limits of what is acceptable. So everyone got ready to go and started the race. Picking up the skull and activating the dead man, Simon thought, I can do it this time. I can definitely win this lesson. First, I will completely assemble his spinal column, number 27, and then, looking back at the board where the skeleton diagram was already being assembled, Simon heard, Oh, I forgot to say, it is forbidden to use the hint from the build poster in this match. Hearing that they would not have any clues, Simon reached for the set and mentally said, Well, at least the dice are numbered. I'll start with the numbers. Then, noticing that there was no numbering, Simon confusedly told the teacher that the bones had no numbers on them. Hearing this, the teacher said, The sets you are working with were educational, and my assistants took it upon themselves to number the bones in the order of assembly, as skeletal sets are sold without numbers. Looking at the student with a disgruntled look, Aaron Day said, I didn't express myself clearly or something. The next moment, Simon remembered what the teacher had told them in class. A necromancer must know the skeletal structure of a summoned creature by heart. Then he thought, Don't give up! You've just got the basic bones. I should be able to recognize them. Picking up the bone, he remembered exactly. Simon mentally said, Well, I'll start with the cervical vertebrae number 2. Observing the collections of skeletons of his students, Aaron Day mentally said that he was accepted under special conditions if he had never collected a skeleton in his life. After that, turning his gaze to Hector, he mentally added, And this fastener looks like he memorized the drawing in the assembly sequence. He relies on knowledge and memory, and he definitely took preparatory courses from there, but his intuition helps him prevent mistakes in critical situations. Hector, as his name is, has a talent for a special number, one close to failure, but he hasn't even been to the preparatory sessions. It seems that only Hector shows some promise in this class. Continuing to assemble the skeleton, Hector mentally said, I'll be the first. And then heard, Well done, Hector! You're almost done. Adding the final details to the skeleton, Hector mentally added, I'm going to destroy you morally so that you don't even think about going against me anymore. I have to make a fool of him. I have to break his will so that he can no longer boast that he was accepted on special terms and at number 1. Gritting his teeth in anger as he stared at Simon, Hector thought, I'm going to have you in the dust. Having completed the construction, Hector's skeleton took the necklace and attached it to himself. Then the teacher exclaimed, Hector was the first to finish. There are 5 minutes left in the lesson, and if Hector keeps the necklace, he wins. Hearing this, Simon mentally said, I overestimated my strength too much. Hector went to preparatory courses, and I only assembled the skeleton by numbers once, so I have very low chances of winning. It's better not to even try to remember what I did in class. With a squeak, having disassembled his skeleton to the basic details, Simon confidently said in his head, This is exactly how I should follow the instructions. I'd rather build a skeleton since I'm better at it than nothing. Looking at what the first number was doing, one of the students exclaimed in surprise that he had already made many mistakes, to which he was told that maybe he had decided to give up. Continuing to mock Simon, someone in the audience shouted that he had neither courage nor talent. Why was he chosen as number 1 at all? I don't understand, and I'm a fool to listen to Dick's ridicule, Simon said nervously, at the same time while assembling the skeleton at his own discretion. Simon mentally said to himself, The professor said that you need to get a necklace with the help of a skeleton, but he didn't say anything about perfect assembly. I don't have enough time to create any kind of tab structure, so I need to simplify it as much as possible. So first, He needs to make his hands like number 20. Reaching for another cat, the boy mentally added, the number 27, not to be missed. This is an important die. 28 can be dropped, and only 29 and 31 can be put in. At one point, the teacher turned his attention to Simon and wondered if he was using the same structure of the gray rat skeleton. The gray rat is the ancestor of the island Pied Piper, whose set of bones we distributed to them, and he recreated his skeleton by simply changing the order and number of bones. Covering his face with his hand in surprise, the teacher nervously added in his head that this was not a complete assembly, but it was still a snake and had to be assembled in the perfect sequence to be able to move. How could a student who had not even taken preparatory courses do this? Did he really intuitively recreate this whole structure in his head? The next moment, hearing the shout of his friends supporting him from the audience shouting, "Simon, forward to victory!" Simon said in his head what they were saying. He continued to listen to comments from students in the audience, and this time Jumia exclaimed, "I don't know what this is, but you did it!" Thinking, "I was the first to assemble a perfect skeleton." After hearing another comment, he added in his head, "Looks don't matter, and I finished the job in just a few minutes despite the drawings." Listening to everyone in the audience cheering his opponent's name, Hector thought irritably, Hector Moore should be the center of attention. After sending his skeleton into battle against Simon's creation, the boy angrily wondered why everyone had taken his side. After attacking the enemy skeleton and cutting it into pieces, Hector smiled slightly and thought, "Well, now I've won." But at that very moment, he noticed that one of the limbs of Simon's skeleton had taken the necklace from his skeleton. Turning to the teacher, Hector nervously exclaimed, "This is a fraud, Professor Aaron! It's ridiculous! You said yourself that you need to make a necklace with the skeleton, but a bone is not a skeleton yet." Hearing his opponent's words, Simon said confidently and then snapped his fingers. The next moment, his skeleton gathered itself together and handed the necklace to its owner. At the same moment, the bell rang to end the lesson, after which the teacher said, "All right, the winner is Simon." After which he took his skeleton in his arms, raised it in the air, and joyfully exclaimed, "We won!" After a while, a dialogue took place in the professor's office. The teacher arrived and said, "I'm glad to see you, Professor. How was the first lesson? I think there are a lot of gifted students in this class. The students are admitted under special conditions, and the excellent students who took the preparatory courses stand out." To this, the professor was answered by Mean Wyland. "For example, I was pleasantly surprised when she made Cher's poison in the first lesson." To which she was told, "Blood is not water, colleague. All 7 young wildlands are outstanding students." After that, one of the attendees asked, "How has the descendant of the ivory tower proved herself?" Her colleague replied, "Oh, Serna, I've seen that the owners of the tower are not in vain proud of her." Chatelmar was also able to excel. He completely dispelled the myth about the intellectual abilities of giants, as there is an opinion that giants do not make magicians. I would ask Seidel if he is interested in magical specialties. In response to these words, another teacher said, "Wow! You already have a star student." To which he was told, "We are not yet authorized to offer mentoring to students." Then a colleague added, "Professor Bakil, you also taught your first lesson today. How did it go?" Putting the cup of tea back in the bowl, the professor asked what it was about, and you answered, "You know what I mean. You had one of your special students in Class A, personally selected Nephis." After hearing additional information from a colleague, Bakil added that he had lost 1 to 10 during a competition to another student. "I'm still not sure how much talent he has at all." To which he was told, "How unexpected! But he is still number 1. Is there really nothing remarkable about him at all?" Hearing this, Bakil replied that his resistance to magic was unexpectedly high. He had withstood 9 casts of exhaustion. To which he was surprised to hear, 9 casts of resistance to magic? Which is no doubt important for a necromancer, but for number 1, it is not very good. After the discussion of his subject, Bakil said, "Oh, by the way, Aaron, you also taught a class today, am I right?" Pouring tea in a mug and approaching, Bandage answered, "Yes, and what was the answer to that?" "We are interested in the special student number 1. Continuing the questioning, Bakil added, "I'm very interested to hear how he has proven himself." In response to a colleague's question, Aaron answered, "Slow, mediocre boy. The only thing that impressed me about him was that he constructed the draft object quite creatively, albeit with mistakes." Hearing these words, another colleague disappointedly replied, "That this year's special number 1 is not talented at all." To which he was told, "That cannot be because he was chosen by Nephis." The next moment, after listening to the opinions of all, Bakil said to himself, Is it just me, or is Aaron just blowing smoke up my ass? He has a rather nasty temper, and for him to speak so ambiguously about a student can only mean that he is interested in the student. Shifting his gaze to the man at the window, he mentally added, a slow, mediocre, creatively but with mistakes constructed object of the call, which by Aaron's standards was just praise. It's definitely not that simple because Nephis personally chose this guy, and our Aaron is definitely interested in his talents. I'm sure of it. After Bakil finished thinking, he said, By the way, Aaron, do you remember how last year you said something? To which he responded with a grudging reply. Last year? Then Bakil said with a fake smile, that you were no longer going to personally mentor students. Hearing what his colleague had mentioned, Aaron replied uncertainly, Professor Aaron. And before he could finish, Nephis burst in and shouted, Greetings. Seeing that they had been visited by the main figure, Bakil took out an ice cream from his spatial hiding place and said, Welcome, ladies. When he handed the girl the treat, she said, Oh, come on. I asked you to stop treating me like a girl. And he replied, A gentleman should treat the ladies. Accepting the gift, Nephis happily said, If the professor is giving it to me, then I will accept it. Then one of her colleagues nervously said, Do you have a refrigerator in your space pocket? To which Bakil replied, Yes. The next moment, one of the teachers pulled out a chair for Nephis and said, Please sit down, ma'am. To which she replied, Thank you. Comfortably seated in her seat, the girl joyfully exclaimed, Well, tell us how you like the new students. Hearing the question from the management, all the teachers approached her and began to tell her happily, Oh, I'm sure that the AYS of the Ivory Tower cannot but be brilliant. Châtel has great abilities, and Men also studies with excellent grades. To which Nephis replied, savoring her ice cream, Good, great. The next moment, the teachers continued, This year, so many young gifts. To Miss Nephis, wishing the deadline for taking students under their wings had already passed. After listening to all her subordinates, the girl happily said, Well, that's just great. If you have any problems, don't hesitate to speak up. And now you're free to go home and have a good rest. After everyone was able to go about their business, Aaron approached the management and said, Nephis, can I speak to you in private? Hearing Aaron's request, the girl happily exclaimed that of course she would go. Going to her office with Aaron, the girl asked what they wanted to discuss, and he replied, I'll tell you everything when we're alone. When he saw colleagues leave the office, Bakil thought that he was as straightforward as ever, but don't think that Nephis will answer your question directly, if at all. At the same time, somewhere in the dormitory, seeing that there were no good options for them, Dick said in frustration, Oh, what to do? There is only one free place in all 4 bedrooms. Hearing this, Simon said, Looks like we're late. There are a lot of people looking for a place in our class. To which Dick replied, The draft theory lesson lasted 3 hours ago, so apparently the rest of the class has already found rooms in the dorm. Hearing the student dialogue, the administrator said, I'm sorry, there are no rooms with 2 free seats on the 2nd floor. To which they replied, Don't worry, it's not your fault. After that, looking at the check-in logs, Simon added, The same thing on the 3rd and 4th floors. To which the administrator added, Yes, it's the same story on all floors. And then Dick added, Maybe we should go around the rooms and ask who would like to switch places? When Simon heard his friend's idea, he said, Hey, that's a good idea. I wouldn't mind going to see what's on the other floors. Hearing the guy's idea, the administrator said, I'll go with you guys, maybe I can help. While they were talking, one of the students bumped into the girl and knocked her down with the wheelchair, saying, You're a dumbass. I told you to get out of the way. To which she nervously replied, I'm sorry. Picking up the fallen suitcase from the ground, one of the 3 boys said, Why are you standing in the middle of the road, maid? Now the suitcase is crumpled on the corner because of you. What are you going to do now? And she nervously exclaimed, I'm sorry. Hearing the girl's apology, one of the nobles said, I'm sorry, don't just stand there, carry the suitcases yourself. To which she replied, Well, standing up for the girl who was being bullied, Simon said sternly, You didn't see us talking to her. Then, looking out from behind Simon, Dick added, pointing a finger at them, We're actually the first in line here, and you almost ran over her with your cart on purpose. Hearing Dick's improper tone, the nobleman said, I see you've lost your way, you commoners, or have you forgotten your place? And the nobleman's friend nervously said, Hey, stop. They are the special number 1, the one who took the oath at the induction ceremony. Recognizing Simon, after the words of his friend, the nobleman quickly fled the scene and exclaimed to her, We will see you again, of course. To which the other grabbed his suitcase and added, Let's get out of here. After receiving protection from Simon in a problematic situation, the watchman happily said, "Thank you for your help." To which he replied, "No thanks, it's my duty." After the conflict was over and the words of gratitude were expressed, the girl happily said, "Well, let's go." Looking through the check-in and availability log, the girl added, "Well, actually, there's one room on the 4th floor with 2 free beds, room 409. Spacious, with a good view from the window, close to the stairs. Now let's see who lives there." And when she saw that there were vacant seats, she immediately became nervous, clutching the magazine to her. The girl said, "Actually, rooms 412 and 413 also have some space, so let's check them first." To which Simon replied, "And 409. Hearing the question from the boy, the girl nervously replied that there were already students there. To which Simon replied that they would ask if they could move in with them. To which the girl nervously added that one of them was one of them. Trying to dissuade the boys from their plan, the girl said, "His name was Kajin Edwell, and he was here for the 2nd year." When Simon heard this, he was surprised to hear that this was a freshman dorm. Then the girl added, "Well, he stayed for the 2nd year. He had some problems with his studies, so he stayed in the 1st year for another year. I'm just an administrator of this dormitory, and I don't know the details, but I heard that many people moved into his room and soon asked to be moved to another place, and the students were bruised. In general, Kajin caused a lot of problems, and usually, they kick people like that out of Kaizen, so it's strange that they made an exception for him." When Dick heard this, he said to Simon, "Maybe we should look for another room." In response to his friend's request, Simon said, "No, let's at least go in to say hello." To which he replied, "Hey, wait." Arriving at the right room, Dick saw Simon grabbing the handle and asked in surprise if he really wanted to enter. Opening the door and entering room 409, Simon said, "Hi, sorry we woke you up. We just wanted to settle in this room." And then they heard a creaking sound, and a bandaged hand appeared on the partition of one of the beds, continuing to get acquainted with the resident of the room. Simon added, "You don't mind, do you?" To which he looked at them and said that they were new. Rising from the bed to a sitting position, Jun said, "Oh yes, today was the ceremony." How quickly time flies. You don't have to be as nice to me as you are. I'm a freshman, so don't worry. Hearing his new roommate's words, Simon replied well to Mr. Edwell, who put his hand on his head and said, "Stop calling me Jun." Immediately after looking at his new neighbors, Kajin said, "I don't know how long you will stay at the academy, but there is something you need to know first. Don't stick your nose in my business, and second, don't make any noise until I go to bed. And when I fall asleep, you can sing or dance or stand on your ears." When Simon heard the rules, he was surprised to hear that they could stay there. He said it didn't matter, because sooner or later everyone who moved in would end up here, and then he snored. When Simon left the room, he told the receptionist that they would be staying there for a while, and she asked him if he was sure about that. Hearing the question from the girl, Simon answered, "Yes, I don't think Jun is such a bad person." To which the administrator replied, "Well, if you have any problems, please don't delay in contacting me. I will inform the hostel manager, and I will take care of everything." To which he bowed and replied, "Well, thank you." After settling into the 409th room, Dick went through his things and asked if he thought he would really not wake up, to which his friend replied, "I don't know, but he said that you can only make noise when he's sleeping. I don't think he's such a bad person, at least as long as we don't break the rules he sets." Throwing the books on the floor to see if he would really not wake up and seeing no reaction, Dick said, "Well, we finally got a room. Let's leave our stuff here and take a shower." Simon asked in surprise, "What shower?" Entering the shower room with his friend and feeling the caressing warmth, Simon happily said, "Wow, it's so hot in here." Dick replied with a look at him, "I've never seen a person so genuinely happy about a simple shower stall." "Did you grow up in the mountains?" Simon replied, "Well, almost." After that, recalling the moment when he was using the shower, Dick added, "But I don't advise you to shout out every time you turn on the tap. People will misunderstand." To which he replied, "That I did." Then his friend replied, "That you were accepted on special terms and were number one." Everyone who was not too lazy was already saying so, and now, in addition to the fame of a talentless imposter, you would also get the fame of a hillbilly. To which Simon replied dejectedly, "What's wrong?" "Well, I still consider it a lucky thing to get into Kian." To which Dick replied, "You're right, everyone wants to get in. However, how long we will stay here will depend on our grades." To which Simon replied, "I heard that less than 300 students will stay for the 2nd year." Hearing his neighbor's words, Dick answered, "Yes, there are a lot of us here now, only because in the 1st year, students cannot be immediately weeded out. It's called the defense period. But just wait, half of those who entered will soon be gone. And then Simon asked, "You mean the defense period?" When he heard his friend's question, Dick confidently answered that during this period, it was impossible to give students grades and openly express their approval. Teachers have no right to have a private conversation with students, and no right to expel students from the academy. It seems that the prohibition of harming students is also prohibited. And there are so many prohibitions during this period of protection that you can't remember them all. After which Simon thought, so everything I experienced today is just a flower. The next moment, sitting down on his bed, Dick continued, at the end of the defense period, teachers will kick everyone out right and left for failing to perform, for breaking the rules, for neglecting homework, for anything. However, if you just hold out until at least the end of the first semester, you will be in demand everywhere, and will easily find a job. If you can withstand the competition and graduate from the academy, then you will become the ruler of the fates of others, and the fates of entire countries will depend on you. Leaning back on the bed, he added, in my opinion, a graduate of this academy can become anything but a member of the royal family. But if some small kingdom gives you a princess, then it is possible. And then Simon asked him if he would like to have a title. Thinking about his friend's question, the guy answered, no, it is not profitable to be a nobleman, but it is not a goal for me. To which Simon added, but then what? Dick gestured with a money sign and said the following, to which the man replied, everything is clear. A little later Dick added, I'm going to plunge into my studies. To which Simon replied, I hear you. After that, he began to activate his spatial pocket ring. At the same time, Dick said, in case you need money. And before he could finish, a suitcase popped up from the floor right in front of him. Looking at the hole in the floor, the boy nervously exclaimed, wow, what is that? How did you do that? To which Simon replied, that is a spatial pocket. I got a skeletal set of island ice pick. Didn't go to preparatory classes, so I bought some for practice in my free time. Hearing this, Dick said tiredly, you just got out of class, and you want to study again? To which his neighbor replied, I just don't want to forget what I did today. Seeing that he had already taken out the first part of the set, Dick asked him if he wanted to build the skeleton correctly this time, to which he replied, no, I'll trust my intuition. When Simon had finished assembling the grey rat and put it on the ground, he said, well, that's it. And Dick replied, you made one just like it in class? Absorbed in his creation, Simon replied, yes, but then I didn't do very well. It took me longer to assemble, and my left paw is kind of lame. To which his friend replied, but you still assembled a whole skeleton. I couldn't have done that. The next moment, Simon put his hand on the skeleton's head and said, I'm sorry. After which it flew across the room. When he saw that he had destroyed the skeleton, Dick nervously exclaimed, you did it so well. After the skeleton was destroyed, Simon began to recall the words of his teacher, Aaron, who said that skeletons awakened by necromancy are drawn to take their natural form. This is called the force of attraction to the original form, or, to put it another way, it's just skeletal attraction. Skeletons awakened by necromancy are drawn to take their natural form. If I remember the order. Looking at the bones lying all over the room, Simon said, then it won't be hard for me to put it back together. And then exclaimed, get back to it! When Dick saw that the skeleton had put itself back together in just a few seconds, he was surprised to hear that it had come together by itself, and Simon replied, yes, you do. Thank you. Immediately afterwards, the boy added, I don't understand how you do it if you didn't even go to preparatory courses. And then he started yawning sweetly. Seeing that his friend was tired, Simon said, you go to bed, and I'll practice for a while. To which he replied, I'm going to sleep. What is our first lesson tomorrow? The dynamo of darkness. Confidently answered the question from his comrade. Simon, lighting a flashlight and sitting the skeleton in front of him, looked at the instructions and said, this time I'll follow the drawing. So you need to connect the knee joints like this so that they stand correctly. Interestingly, maybe then he will be able to walk straight. After conducting some experiments, Simon began to record everything, dictating that simply turning the joints does not help. The formulas for assembling skeletons are the result of centuries of experience of necromancers. Most likely, this experience was gained through trial and error, and this is the way I'm trying to find the right formula now. Each task has a reason for its value. Using trial and error to try to recreate the formula for the correct assembly, I begin to understand how much the necromancers of past generations had to go through. When Simon had finished making some changes to the skeletal structure, he said, I tried to swap bones number 25 and 31. If I see that this combination doesn't work, I'll put them back in place. No matter how much I think I can do something better, you still have the only skeletal structure that makes your movements most natural, and I'm learning so fast. The next moment, taking up a book with the information he needed, the guy added, "Well, I must continue my search." Recalling the moments of his presence at the conscription of the dead, Simon mentally said, "My father hid the skeletons in our village to help the villagers, and Lorraine also summoned skeletons to deal with street robbers." Looking at his mouse skeleton, the boy said, "I wonder what I lack to be able to do that. I'm already looking forward to the next lesson." The next day, when the lesson on the dynamics of darkness began, the students heard that darkness is the main power of a necromancer, and that's why the dynamics of darkness is the basis of all the basics. For you, this course was taught by Eric, a professor of the dynamics of darkness. So how exactly does darkness allow us to create black magic? To do this, you need to understand the laws of the flow of darkness, the meaning of runes, and magic circles. Runic writing dates back to the time of the Temple of Del and the Bowl of Eternal Flame. At first, no one wondered why that fire never went out, and all because of this it was considered a manifestation of the power of the gods, and asking questions about such manifestations was simply impudence. One day, the ministers of the temple noticed some letters in the ashes of the eternal fire, and they were amazed that this flame was not extinguished by scribbled letters. Here's the story of how the runes were discovered. The necromancers and wizards of antiquity supplemented and improved this writing, and it has survived to this day. Starting to draw something on the board, the teacher said, "Here are additional runes on top of those that were opened near the eternal fire, and here are 2 magic circles using the above new runes. One of these magical circles is inoperative, and on the right side of it is a working circle. The only difference between them is how the runes are used. You have all already worked with pencils more freely. Darkness is used in this case." Interrupting in mid-sentence, the teacher put down the chalk and said, "Let's finish the lecture. I have homework for you. Take the inoperable magic circle that is drawn on the board and here is the text with correct punctuation. Work on the mistakes and show me the correct drawing that will make it possible to activate it. I'm also going to call 3 students to the board at my discretion to present their work, and I'll see you for the next assignment." When Dick got out of class and went to the garden near the academy for a break, he said tiredly that the dynamics of darkness are so heavy. Simon answered him with a precise observation, throwing his hands behind his head. Dick added that he remembered his math lessons with his father. "Why can't you just give us the right formula and deduce it yourself?" His friends answered him, but I still liked it. I didn't understand more than half of the lecture, but I liked the way he explained everything, to which Dick replied, "You just like Casey, that's all. You were telling me all morning how much you like the shower and the smelling soap." Then the boy slapped me on the back. Arriving at the open area, the boy asked his friend Simon what was next on the schedule, to which he replied that we would have combat magic. Then he heard that the lesson would be here, and where was our teacher? The next moment, pointing to a spot in front of her, Jamie Victoria exclaimed, "Hey, look over there." Looking in front of them, where a pile of dust was rising, the students exclaimed in surprise, "Something is running toward us." Or was it just me, or was the ground really shaking? Before they could finish speaking, they heard a joyful voice saying, "Bugaloo. Welcome newcomers. Professor Hong Pang will be teaching a lesson on Mount Rogue. Jump on hippos and go." Hearing what is required of them, the students nervously exclaimed, "Jump on hippos." At the same time, leaning over to his friend, Dick whispered, "Actually, don't be surprised. Hong Pang is famous even among the teachers at Kaizen. I heard that she lives in the mountains camping on Mount Rogue," to which Simon replied in surprise, "Are you serious?" The next moment, one of the students said, "Hey, uncle, you want us to climb these giants? You could have at least put a blanket on them or something." When he heard the presentation from one of the students he was supposed to deliver to the mountain, the man jumped up from the hippo's back and flew forward, landing spectacularly on the impudent disciple. He heard, "What are you doing, and how dare you command us commoners? We are Kaizen disciples." "What impudence?" To which he replied that he was a commoner. Looking up at the impudent nobleman who decided to be rude to him, the man said angrily, "I wonder where you come from, you rude people. I'm not a commoner here. Remember this, you'll need it." When he heard the man's name, the boy exclaimed, "I'm sorry." Ada smilingly asked him what he was saying, and the student repeated, "I'm sorry, mister." Ada. Looking at what was happening to the impudent, Simon whispered to Dick, "These upstarts are all stepping on the same rake," to which he whispered back, "I'm telling you, you're very different from most nobles." After getting down from that nobleman, Ada happily announced, "We're late, so get on the saddle. No more than 3 people per animal." After hearing Ada's instructions, the students gathered around the hippos and shouted goodbye. Climbing on the animal with his friend, Dick nervously said, "Oh, he's so fat that it's impossible to climb on him." At that time, Simon saw someone else trying to climb on. Hearing Ada's words, who asked if everyone was settled, the girl exclaimed, "Oh please, wait." When Simon saw that she was not able to get out on her own, he offered his hand and asked, "Do you need help?" Grabbing the girl's hand, the guy easily pulled her onto the animal and sat her down in front of him. When everyone had taken their places on the animals, Ada confidently exclaimed, "Well, everyone, hold on tight." After giving the command to his hippos to move, the guide heard nervous voices from the students. "Mr. Ada, I'm going to fall. What should we hold on to?" Looking around at the rest of the students who were struggling to stay on the animals, he exclaimed, "Overcome the difficulties. Train your will. This is part of today's training." After these words, he looked back at the disciples, smiled joyfully, and said, "If you fall, you will die under the feet of other hippos. How do you like this prospect? Once or twice a year we have accidents." Where students hear this and nervously exclaim, "What does it mean?" Realizing what Mr. Ada had just said, everyone started shouting, "Stop! I want to get off. I'm sorry. Help me." To which Ada replied, "Stay in the saddle. We don't need students who can't even stand a hippo ride." Arriving at the right place, all the students left the dangerous transport and fell to the ground, after which they began to distribute water to each of them with the words, "Take this." Catching their breath and enjoying the watering hole, they happily said, "How good it was to drink. Thank you very much." Before they could catch their breath, they suddenly heard a woman's voice say, "Welcome to class, children." When she came out to meet her students, the teacher added, "My name is Hong Ping Tanoka Marlin," pounding her chest. The woman added, "I am your teacher of martial magic. The giant hydra that burned down 4 parishes, the Hydra Kunder, a legendary necromancer, fought against this titanic monster for 5 days, and Hong Ping Tanoka Marlin, a professor of martial magic, achieved a glorious victory by breaking all 100 necks of the hydra with his own hands." After introducing herself to the students, the woman joyfully said, "Please stand up, and now I'm going to ask you to line up in 4 rows." The students were surprised to hear this order, seeing that they did not understand what she wanted them to do. Mr. O.T. repeated, "In 4 lines! Hurry up!" To which the students responded. Well, as Simon followed the rest of the students, he thought to himself, "Where are we going?" Seeing that their teacher was running somewhere, the students immediately followed her and heard the words. Remember, people, a healthy body and a healthy mind are the basis of martial magic and good physical form. Looking at the teacher's footsteps, Simon thought, "It's amazing how she can run so fast. She seems to be an ordinary person, but she is on a completely different level." Continuing the cross-country course, Hongpong said, "Today we will learn how to increase our physical strength with the help of darkness, and learn the simplest battle tactics. Necromancers who focus on combat magic are called combat necromancers. If you become at least a little bit like them, then the darkness will stand out from your body without any heaviness, like a silk ribbon, and you can make clothes out of this ribbon of darkness. It is called the vesture of darkness. Only combat necromancers have this feature." As they were careful because there were trees ahead, barely catching up with Simon in the woods, Dick exclaimed, "I envy the guys who have a talent for martial arts." To which Simon replied, "Who has such a talent?" The next moment, he looked up and saw his classmates moving around in the trees and added that they really seemed to be having fun. The next moment, Dick exclaimed tiredly to Simon, "Simon, are you there?" To which he confidently exclaimed, "I'm fine." And then added tiredly, "How can that be fine?" Hearing a surprised voice from his exhausted friend, Simon replied, "I just grew up at the foot of the mountain, and it feels good to run like home." As soon as Dick found out the reason for his friend's endurance, he said, "You're a beast. I envy you." After a while, the students and the teacher arrived at the cliff, and Hongpong said, "Now we need to jump over this cliff to the other side." When the students saw how far it was to the other side of the bank, they asked in confusion, "Okay, but how are we supposed to jump over here?" When the teacher heard the question from her students, she happily said, "There is a trick. You usually highlight darkness through your hands, but now try to highlight it through your feet." Putting her advice into practice, the teacher said, "Watch me," demonstrating the possibilities of releasing darkness through the feet. The professor said to everyone, "You only need to make 1 jump. At the moment of the jump, release the darkness through your feet as if spraying it through the air. You will feel as if the darkness is pushing you up." Having crossed over to the other side, the woman stretched her arm above her and exclaimed, "Come on, let's go to me." When the students heard that it was time for them to try to get to the other side, they all rushed forward and exclaimed, "Let's try!" Taking the advice, many students overcame the obstacle and found themselves on the other side of the river near the teacher. After helping some students who were hanging over the cliff, Hongpong said, "If you start the flow of darkness too late, you can fall, as you did now. Next time, start earlier." To which the student replied, "Well, thank you, Professor." Preparing to jump to the other side, Simon repeated over and over again, "To push off the darkness, to push off the darkness." To which Dick said, "Hey, I think you're getting carried away." To which he replied, "This is a serious matter." Hearing this, Dick ran to the cliff and exclaimed, "If you think too much, you'll never get anywhere. I'll go first." He noticed that Hector, who jumped higher than him, was jumping with him, but Dick couldn't land on his feet, and after landing near Hector, he heard a wonderful, "Hector, you have the highest jump." Rubbing himself down after an unsuccessful landing, the guy said unhappily, "I don't like the shot at all." Immediately afterwards he raised his hand in the air and exclaimed, "Well, Simon, even I did it. Come on, let's go." After repeating what he had to do, Simon jumped across the gorge with a lot of momentum. Seeing the height of his jump, Dick exclaimed, "That's great, Simon." After he landed right in front of his friend, Dick happily added, "Well done." That was the highest jump. When the teacher saw that everyone had already completed the task, she said, "It seems that everyone has crossed the river. Let's wait for those who fell into the water. When they get out, we'll move on to the next lesson." To which Simon happily exclaimed, "Good, Professor." When the whole group finally got together again, they went to a new location. While moving around, Dick asked, "By the way, Simon, do you want to take a look while we're walking?" To which he replied that he did. Opening his notebook, the guy said, "This is a list of students who can be invited to our homework group. The group homework will start in a week, and we need to start recruiting already." I made a list with names of talents and a short description. Looking through everything that was written on the pages, Simon was surprised to hear, "How you managed to collect so much information?" To which he replied that it was a secret of the company. Here we have the most important people. While he prioritized who should be approached first, Simon thought, "I was barely learning the lecture material, and Dick had found information about so many students. So that's why he turned to me and not to Hector. He had already gathered information about him and didn't like it. Still, to form a gang, you need to at least get along with each other." At the end of the reflection, Simon asked, "So what can you say about your search?" And he replied that most of us in the class were pretty good at it. This girl who rode with us on the hippo will most likely not survive the competition, and will be kicked out as soon as the protection period is over. Out of the entire class, only 2 failed to jump the cliff, and she was one of them. She would most likely get it, to which Simon replied clearly. The next moment, the teacher exclaimed, "Well, boys and girls, we've had a little rest. Let's run again." Hearing that they had to run again, the students exclaimed, "We thought we could still rest." At the same time, Simon, who was happy to continue jogging, said, "I like this lesson so much. It's so dynamic." Dick replied that he liked all the lessons. Suddenly, the students heard a noise and an earthquake. Looking back, they saw hippos running after them, and one of the students shouted out, "Professor, there's a herd running at us." When the students looked in the direction of the professor and found no one there, they shouted in confusion that the professor needed to call for help. Finding no one to help them at all, the disciples exclaimed that Atu was nowhere to be found. At the same time, Simon, who was closest to the hippos, thought to push away from the darkness as he was in the air. After dodging the hippos, Simon thought Dick said that there shouldn't be any dangerous situations during the period of student protection. It was someone else's fault. Someone can definitely get hurt if they don't manage to escape. The next moment, Cindy Valles appeared in the air next to Simon and happily said, "Hello, Simon." It's been a long time, but he simply ignored her. When he landed on the ground after inspecting the situation, he thought that he was wrong to think that there was someone to worry about in this class. Immediately afterward, Simon looked up at his friend and asked how he was doing, to which he replied that he was fine as he sat down and bowed his head. After the danger had passed, Simon thought, "I shouldn't have worried. I still have to compete with 1,000 other students like him." At the same time, Dick, who saw Simon's strange behavior, asked, "Hey, are you sure you're okay? You're probably a little confused, but don't worry. All these animals are under the full control of Professor Hongbing," he said, and he heard a surprised response. The next moment, Dick added confidently, "Yes, she is a master of magical martial arts, but she has druids in her family, so she has power over all animals. From above, I saw hippos walking around. Those hippos fell to the ground at the same time as the students arrived after they had survived the incident with the hippos. ATA exclaimed, "Don't stay up too late. It's time to get up," to which the students responded, "Well." Seeing that the students were getting up rather slowly, Mr. OT exclaimed, "The hippos will soon turn around and run back. Quickly!" Hearing this, the succubus girl stood up sharply and exclaimed in fright, "Good." Then Ada added, "The professor is waiting for you over there." As the students began to approach Hongping, she shouted out, "No more obstacles. Everyone race to me and squeeze all the speed out of you." When everyone finally got to the teacher, she said, "Well done, everyone. Now you can rest. Oh, I'm sure you won't have lunch until after class, but I thought you'd be very tired, so I contacted the administration." The next moment, pointing to her left, she said, "Look at what the students shouted." "And what's over there?" Seeing a trolley with assistants in a mobile kitchen, the students shouted, "Lunch." When the assistants began to carry boxes of food to the students, the teacher asked if they wanted to eat, and they exclaimed, "Yes. You are the best, Professor." Tasting the lunch delivered to them for training, Dick said, "There is no one better than her, Professor. She fed the students, sacrificing lesson time for something you don't see from other teachers." To which Simon replied, "By the way, Dick, you don't see that from other teachers. I had heard about something else before when I came to Kien." When I heard this, the guy was surprised to hear what it was about. Then Simon added, "I was told that Hongping was a typical Kien teacher." Hearing this, Dick replied, "Hongping was a nature lover, a typical Kien teacher." "Who told you such a stupid thing?" Then Simon remembered the words of his friend who had told him that among the teachers there was a Professor Hongping, and then thought, Lena Knapp's daughter had told him. After finishing lunch, the students heard, "Let's wrap it up, folks. In 10 minutes, we'll be heading back to the academy." After hearing what the teacher had just said, Simon also heard from one of the students, and he thought, "We would rest and go back on the hippos." The next moment, looking out into the vast expanse that opened up before him, Simon thought, "I have a feeling this is just the beginning." After lining up all the students in front of her, Teacher Hongping asked if any of them had wristbands for their cats. And I gave them out and was told, "Yes, Professor." Then she gave her next order. "Listen carefully now, everyone will fill it with their own darkness." As soon as the students have followed the teacher's order and pointed back to themselves, they said they all know what a depletion spell is. "Look at the flag. You must get to the hill under the influence of the spell of exhaustion. Get ready. And of course, I will keep an eye on those who are lagging behind, feeling the power of the debuff." Dick thought, "Processor, are you seriously legitimate?" And then shouted out to everyone to start. "Let's get ready and go. Let's keep up, continuing to overcome step by step." Simon mentally said, "Every step I take is a great effort, and I feel dizzy." However, preparatory courses will not help anyone now. This test will show who has the endurance and willpower. If I fall behind now, all other studies will only be harder for me. Continuing to overcome each step with a known effort, the boy confidently added in his head, "I will do it, no matter what it takes." Not far from Simon, Hector was also crawling with his last strength. He happened to notice him and thought, "You bastard." Again I used my own methods to get ahead, but he still caught up with me. Gathering his strength, the guy thought, "Okay, I'll grind you to powder right here." Seeing how a couple of guys were trying in vain to get to the finish line first, the teacher happily exclaimed, "You're almost there." Suddenly, a girl walked by them as if nothing had happened and won the competition, after which the teacher said, "Meanwhile took first place. I congratulate you on your victory." She bowed and replied, "Thank you, Professor." Immediately afterwards, the professor was surprised to hear, "You walk with a normal gait and not at all tired. How did you manage it?" To which she replied, "I used the formula for resisting the spell of exhaustion." Hearing the answer, the professor replied, "Well done. You can rest." To which she responded, "Yes, Professor." At that very moment, Hector mentally said, "I didn't know you could just protect yourself from a spell." The next moment, one of the assistants nervously informed the professor that a wounded man had sprained his ankle, to which she replied, "Okay, I'll take a look." After running past a couple of guys who were fighting so hard for first place, the girl exclaimed, "You've almost reached the goal. I believe in you." The next moment, using a spell of resistance to exhaustion, Hector said angrily, "This is just a mockery." When Hector saw that the student had reached the OT checkpoint, he shouted out, "Second place." After passing the test, the guy immediately went up to me and said, "What are you doing in a martial arts class, removing a curse from yourself? You think I'm sweating it out just because I don't know how to remove exhaustion?" Of course. What can you know about the world if you've lived your whole life in an ivory tower like a princess? The girl replied. You want to fight me? Hearing the question from the girl, Hector answered. No, I'm just saying that teachers will not give us grades during the defense period, during which time it is important to show your diligence and discipline to earn a good reputation with teachers. And this stupid thing you just did probably showed Professor Hong Hong that you can't be trusted. To which the girl replied, You're really so disappointed that I bypassed you? Why are you showing me this? Hector added, I'm asking you not to cheat in class anymore, that's all. As for you personally, I have no interest in you. I said goodbye. At the same time, the assistant handed the student water and told Simon. Valencia took third place. To which he replied, Thank you. While resting under a tree, Simon was approached by his friend, who tiredly said to Simon, I'm going to die. To which he replied, You did it. I'm tired. The next moment Dick added, How do you think we'll get back? If they tell me I have to climb the hippo again, I'll just bite my tongue and die on the spot. When everyone had finished the test and had a little rest, the teacher called out to the class to gather around. Since you are so tired, I asked the administration for a favor and was granted permission to teleport. So get in line. Upon hearing this, the students joyfully exclaimed, Thank you, Professor. Moving the students one by one, the girl said the following, after which Simon and his friend said, We are leaving. Using the magic circle, Simon found himself in a strange building that did not look like Kian at all. Looking around after a hard landing, Simon said in confusion, Oh, where is it? I don't think it's Kian. It somehow looks more like my house in Lille. The next moment he heard the teacher's voice saying to him, I'm sorry for scaring you, Simon. Please sit down, and I'll explain why I moved you here. I secretly adjusted the magic circle of the teleport. It helped me. We made the magic circle react to one of the students differently. To which Simon responded in surprise, In the sense of me? Holding out a glass to Simon, the teacher added, It was your darkness that was the idea to move you to another place. Pouring water into a glass, Hong Pong said, Do you know why I did that? And the boy replied, I don't. Then the girl confidently said, Of course. I am responsible for the safety of each of the students, and that is why we decided to move you to my house. I also just wanted to talk to you in person without any prying ears. When Simon heard another reason for his move here, he asked me what was wrong with her. Hands folded in front of her, the teacher said to the students, We are not allowed to talk to them in person until the end of the defense period, but I know that some professors have already broken this rule. I decided to move you here to ask you what you think about going to the martial arts program. If you wish, I will make you my student. Hearing this, Simon asked in surprise what it meant to be her personal student. In response to Simon's question, Hong Pang answered, Exactly that. I will teach you myself. As a personal student, I will be able to teach with full responsibility and dedication. We are allowed to take no more than 3 students from each stream. The better the professor, the better his student, and I want to give this rare opportunity to you, Simon. Extending her hand after the announcement of the rare opportunity, she added, What do you think, Simon Felina? Do you want to become my personal student? To which he replied in confusion, I don't understand you. I didn't prove myself in the class, unlike all the others. I could barely cope with the tasks and still took 3rd place, and today is only the 2nd day of classes, so I sincerely do not understand why you are offering me mentoring. Hearing that he was so self-critical and underestimated himself so much, Hong Pang happily told the students that it was possible and important to take a place. But the teacher looked at him and said, First, you used the darkness so well when overcoming the cliff because it was the first time for you. He replied, Oh, you're right. Then the teacher added, Despite this, you also jumped higher than everyone else in the class. It can't be a coincidence, it's definitely a talent. Also, when you climbed the hill under the curse, you survived the race relying only on your strength and endurance, unlike the first 2 disciples. It may not seem like a big deal to you, but to me, it speaks volumes. That's why I chose you. Your stamina, willpower, and outstanding talent for controlling darkness will show up best in martial magic, and I think you'll be even stronger than me in a few years. Even more, I'm determined to make you the strongest mage in the world. After listening to his teacher, Simon said, Professor, I am grateful to you for such a generous offer. Rising from his seat, Simon added, But to be honest, I have to decline. She replied, But why? Then Simon said, Actually, now I see a lot of craving for another subject. To which she added, Well, that's fine. Stretching out at the table after the conversation, Hong Pang happily said, Well, thank you for telling me about it right away, but that doesn't mean I'm going to back down or give up," Simon said, surprised to hear what she was talking about. Then the girl confidently said, "You have a whole year ahead of you. That's why I'll have plenty of time to convince you." To which the guy replied, "Why are you willing to go so far from me?" In response, she said, "I'm just really curious how strong you can become, and I want to know the answer to that question, even if it is not related to my mentoring request." Using the magic of teleport, Hong Pang added, "Finally, you can contact me with any questions." To which he replied, "Thank you, Professor." Creating a magic circle on the floor, the girl said, "I will ask you to keep this meeting secret for the period of student protection, though. And yes, the teleporter will definitely bring you to Keys this time." Hearing this, Simon smiled happily and said, "Thank you very much." After waving goodbye, Hong Pang said, "Well, go ahead, and see you in the next class." To which he replied, "Goodbye, Professor." Standing on the magic circle, which immediately activated, the boy added, "See you in class." After the personal dialogue with Hong Pang was over, A came into her room and asked her how Simon had responded, to which she said he had refused. Hearing this, A exclaimed angrily, "How dare he refuse? Can you offer mentoring to Hector? He is much more gifted in magic. I don't understand at all why you're interested in this Simon." To which she replied, "He is a genius." A asked her in surprise, "Are you serious?" Then the girl folded her arms in front of her and confidently said, "I've seen a lot of gifted children in Kaisa, but I have never met a genius like him." Arriving at the shower room, Simon met his friend there and asked him where he had been for so long, to which he replied that something was wrong with the teleporter. Immediately after that, Dick added happily, "Oh, by the way, you know what happened to me?" "You'll never guess." To which Simon asked, "Well, what?" Then the boy said happily, "When I stepped on the teleportation circle, I felt that my body might have moved, but suddenly something stopped me. And when I came to, I found myself in a completely unexpected place. I was like, where am I? But as it turned out later, I found myself in Professor Bach's office, who was sitting on the couch right in front of me when I arrived." When Simon heard exactly where he had ended up, the curse theory teacher asked in surprise, and Dick happily added that he had. When Simon heard about the interesting teleporter overlay, he asked, "What happened next?" And he replied, "He made me clean his entire office." Told by Keys and alumni that professors often intercept students during teleportation, I think this is my case. Professor Basil has noticed me. Maybe he'll make me his personal student. To which Simon replied, "Well, maybe." Jumping on the spot with joy, Dick began to exclaim, "You know what it means to be a private student? It's complete freedom of learning. It's a pleasure. The professor is even able to protect you from punishment and expulsion." To which his friend replied, "Let's keep it down." Hearing Simon's request, Dick said excitedly, "I can't be a little quieter, it's important." He was answered with, "Such nonsense I've never heard in my life." Intervening in the conversation between the two boys, who were making a lot of noise, Hector Moore added that it was ridiculous for Professor Bakel to take a commenter as a student. Looking back to see who had approached them, Dick said unhappily, "Oh, your lordship is unhappy. You are jealous that Professor Bakel noticed me and not you." In each barrel of corkscrews, when Hector heard these words from his fellow student, he said, "Hey, watch how you talk, you half-ass peddler." And Dick replied, "It's because I'm a half-ass peddler that I know your brother very well. I heard that you had a fight with Mean in battle magic. Do you really think it's hard for you here alone? We're all in the same position here, so don't brag about the fact that the Moore family arranged preparatory courses for you." Continuing to irritate Hector, Dick added that it was not Mean but Hector who knew nothing about the real world. Unable to bear this attitude, Hector angrily exclaimed, "You're a nerve!" and then used a curse on Dick. Seeing that his friend suddenly turned pale, Simon nervously exclaimed, "Hey Dick, what's wrong with you?" The next moment, Hector threw the boy against the wall, shouting, "How dare you, a plebeian, treat me like that? You decided to say it now, and you didn't choose the best words." Trying to calm his friend down to prevent problems, Simon grabbed Hector by the shoulder and exclaimed, "Hector, don't do that. It's against the rules. Cursing outside of class is forbidden." Hitting his friend to silence him, Hector noticed that Simon was coming at him, and blocking his blow, he said, "I was wondering when you would intervene." Simon, feeling a surge of anger, used the Flame of Darkness skill as he added, "Well, let's fight for real." Suddenly, a soap flew in Hector's direction, which stopped the fight, and then Kaijin appeared in the shower and said, "Hey, don't fight here. If you disobey my words, I will break the necks of both of you." Is that clear? Looking at the guy who interrupted them, Hector said in surprise, "Hey, Kaijin, I did not know you were still with us at the academy." To which his friend added, "Hector, wait. He's the guy who repeated the second year because he beat up students." "You've heard of him." So Hector said, "I don't care. Let's go." Leaving the shower stall after the intervention of a third party, Hector said goodbye to Dick. "Be careful next time, I won't forgive this again." After the situation was resolved, Simon happily said, "Kaijin, thank you for the help." But before he could finish, he was interrupted by a man who said, "Get out of the way." When Kaijin also left the shower, Simon said happily to his friend, "You see, he's not a bad person at all." And Dick added, rubbing his neck, "Yeah, sure." When the next day came, Dick was about to go out for some air and asked Simon what he had planned for the weekend. He confidently replied that he had none, and then he felt bored that he had no plans for the weekend. Then Simon asked, "I see you already have a plan." Pointing to his friends, he confidently said, "The weekend program is more important to me than the lessons." And then he heard, "Why?" As Dick was packing his bag for the walk, he said happily, "I'm going to Rochester." To which Simon asked, "That's a town down the hill. What are you going to do there?" With a sly smile after his colleague's question, Dick replied that he was looking for a place to do business. "You know how much scholarship we have, and the further we go, the harder it will be to survive on it. Of course, you can get a grant for studying, but with my grades, it's hardly possible. And that is why I plan to start working in the profession as soon as possible. You should also find a source of income. When the defense period is over, teachers will stop issuing teaching materials, and scholarships will definitely not be enough to cover the cost of teaching materials. So seniors find ways to earn money on the side. Do you want to follow the path of a necromancer summoner? So this problem will become even bigger for you. After which, the theory of summoning, quoted by Aaron, will cost you a lot of money." Then Simon replied unhappily, "I didn't know we had to provide ourselves with survival materials in Kaizen. It's a hard thing to do." His comrade replied, "That's what I'm talking about. But you can wait until I find an opportunity to earn money in Rochester. I can definitely find a job for you." To which Simon replied, "No, I have to earn it myself." Hearing his friend's words, Dick said thoughtfully, "You have a strict upbringing about money." And then added, "Okay, I'll be back tomorrow after I finish my business." To which Simon replied, "You're going now? But it's too late. What if the boss catches you?" After hearing Simon's warning, Dick confidently said, "It's okay, the rules are strict at Kaizen, but you can have a guard for every student. I'll sneak in without being noticed." Reaching for the cakes that were standing next to him, Simon mentally said, "I brought these for Kay as a thank you, but he's been gone so long, and Dick is gone too." Just as he was about to enjoy one cake himself, he felt someone looking at him through the window. Looking back, he saw the rector and called out to Nephis in surprise, to which she happily replied, "Oh, hello." Opening the window for her to come inside, Simon nervously asked her how she got in, to which she replied, "I was just passing by." Hearing the girl's excuse, Simon nervously exclaimed, "But we're on the 4th floor." Having treated the rector to cake, Simon said, "You can take as many as you want." And she didn't even think about refusing. After tasting one of them, she said happily, "What a joy! Though I don't get to eat desserts at home." "So, Simon, how are you doing at the academy?" He answered, "Quite interestingly. All the teachers are very good, my classmates are friendly, and I fit in better than I expected at first, but my friend helped me to get used to it." Hearing this, Nephis waved her hand joyfully and said, "Really? I thought it would be hard for you because you didn't go to the preparatory courses. It's so nice to see you at Kaizen. It reminds me of when Richard studied here." When Simon heard this, he exclaimed in surprise, "That was my father." Recalling one of the students of the academy, the girl confidently said, "Your father also studied here. Richard was a real troublemaker. You're nothing like him, so serious and responsible. Your father was a disaster, and not very smart either. He teased the teachers and was punished for it, and he ran away from class several times. I even personally dragged him to class." Hearing the rector's story, Simon grabbed his head and said, "I can't believe it. I know my father to be completely different." To which Nephis replied in surprise. After that, Simon asked if he had completed his studies, to which Nephis replied, "No, he had interrupted his studies, saying that Kaizen was too small for him." Kaizen had never seen a student like him in its life. Leaning back on the bed, she added, "He was a special case. I was young at the time and didn't know how to handle him, and I was young then too. The next moment, she jumped up and added, Richard turned the whole island upside down, and if you walk around and look, you can find traces of his father's magic. Try it. I think it will add interest to your studies, and I'm going to go now. I have things to do for the evening. Then Nephis opened the window to leave and said, If I'm late, they'll be scolding me. We'll see each other again soon. Thank you for the goodies, and bye, Simon. After saying goodbye to the rector, Simon caught a leaflet that had fallen out of her pocket, and exclaimed, Nephis, you lost the leaflet. Seeing that she was gone, Simon closed the window and thought for sure that this note was for him. Having unfolded it, and examined it, the boy was surprised to find that it was a treasure map. But why was there a skull at the end of the road, and where were the treasures? The next moment, the words of Nephis flashed through his mind. At one time, he turned the whole island upside down. If you walk around and look, you can find traces of your father's magic. Having decided to go in search of his father's traces himself, Simon grabbed his backpack and said to Dick that it was okay not to fast, so he did not. Gathering everything he needed for the hike, the boy joyfully exclaimed, I'm going to go and explore tomorrow. The next day, when he arrived at the beginning of the path that passed through a dark forest, Simon nervously thought, Maybe I should go back while I still have the opportunity. No, I took an overnight permit specifically for this, and I can't miss this opportunity. Seeing a sign at the entrance to the forest, the boy thought, There are monsters in there, but I don't know what kind of monsters live on the island of rock, so I need to be careful. Following the map into the darkness of the forest, Simon said, On the east side is a stream, and on the west side is the Kaizen fortress wall. I'm on the right track. The next moment, hearing a noise, Simon hid in the bushes and thought that the monster was some kind of large predator, even though it turned out to be a caterpillar. A few seconds later, a werewolf appeared in front of Simon, heading straight for him. Grabbing his dagger to resist the monster, the boy thought, How fast he is! What kind of monster is this? It flashed in the dark, and he didn't even have time to see it. Looking at the monster standing a few meters away, he mentally added, That it's a werewolf. Judging by its size, it's a young individual. If this was the beginning of my studies in Sini, I would have just run away. Calling his skeletons, the wingmen, Simon handed them weapons and shouted to them to get ready for battle. When he was already in full combat readiness, he said confidently, But now I no longer need to run from monsters. As soon as the monster began its attack, Simon shouted out, It's coming! As soon as the monster smashed one of Simon's skeletons, he felt a significant heaviness and pain in his head, but after a few seconds he shouted, Rise up! And the skeleton came back together. Both skeletons did their job. Simon saw a good opportunity to attack and shouted, Here's my chance! Having dealt with the monster with the help of the summoned skeletons, Simon breathed out a sigh of relief and said, I almost got into trouble, and this was my first real battle in K, so I needed to train with the skeletons of the chrysalids in Leash Hill. I would have run away from such a monster, but 3 days in Kaizen made me so much stronger. I wonder where the limit of my growth will be if I stay in Kaizen for 3 years. The next moment, seeing his beaten soldiers, Simon nervously said, Oh, I don't have time for dreams. I need to deal with the body before the other monsters start coming to the smell of blood. When the skeleton of the damaged chrysalid disintegrated, Simon said, patting it on the head, Well done, you served me well. The next moment, looking at the soldier he had left, the guy added, We're not going to get into a fight anymore. It's not profitable for us, so let's go. Arriving at the right place, Simon saw only a desert and said in surprise, But there's nothing here, not even grass. But if there is no grass growing here, it can only mean that there is definitely something underground. When he brought out a shovel and a flashlight for dark work, the boy joyfully exclaimed, How good I was to borrow some tools from the dormitory. After digging up a rather large rock and bumping into something, the boy said in surprise that it was a black stone, so it could be some kind of device buried. After clearing the excavation site, Simon suddenly noticed a hole in the stone. He looked at his hand and said thoughtfully, That fits just right for my hand. Sticking his hand into the hole to find out what was there, he added, If it was some kind of magical device, it should react to my darkness. When he saw some movements after being filled with mana, the guy exclaimed in surprise, and then a staircase appeared in front of him. Determined not to waste time, the boy confidently said, Well, let's go down and have a look. Going inside with his beastman skeleton, Simon looked around and said thoughtfully, Wow, this place looks like some kind of ancient ruins. Noticing something strange on the walls, he approached them and added, This looks familiar. Oh, it's definitely ancient runes, I'm sure of it. I wonder if the runes are also ancient, if this dungeon is painted with them. After walking a little further, Simon found himself in a room and said thoughtfully, "So this is some kind of ancient altar." Hearing that, his skeleton began to make noise. The boy looked at him and saw that he was pointing at something and then asked him what he had found. Approaching the place the skeleton pointed out to him, the boy was surprised to hear that it was a skull. Touching the found skull, Simon mentally recited, "This one, even with my little understanding of necromancy, I can still see that it is quite an ancient dead man and quite dangerous." He then picked it up and said, "What is the skull of such a monster doing here?" The next moment, when he heard a noise behind him, the boy immediately looked back and said nervously, "I was afraid of what happened." Picking up a bone from a skeleton that had just fallen to the ground, he was surprised to find that it was bone number 2. The next moment, he immediately pulled it to his skull to put it back in place. After putting the two parts together, the boy thought, "I don't know how this undead thing will behave if I try to pick it up, maybe it will even attack me. But I still want to collect it." After placing the skull and bone number 2 on the altar, Simon confidently said, "Now is the time." Using his magic, the boy poured a little darkness into the dead man to try to wake him up. Noticing that his pupils had opened, he exclaimed joyfully, "I did it! I did so well!" Awakening the skeleton, he said, "Now all that's left is to do is collect the rest of his body." After some time of effort, Simon finished attaching the last parts of the skeleton's body and said tiredly, "Phew! I thank myself over and over again for sitting here for days collecting skeletons. If I hadn't practiced, I wouldn't have made it through the night. Of course, I'm not completely sure that everything is in its place, but it's still a human skeleton, and I think I've assembled it more or less correctly. But I don't understand why it is so huge. Why did you want to stand up as soon as you got your legs? If I had known in advance, I would have gathered your hands first." Having finished assembling the skeleton, the boy said that it looked good when assembled and that it was clearly more than 2 meters tall. But what would happen next? After these words, a bright light appeared over the skeleton and rapidly approached it. As soon as it got to the skeleton and hit it, he exclaimed, "Finally, I'm back!" Forming its body, after waking up, the skeleton exclaimed, "Who dared to disturb my sleep?" Looking around, the skeleton noticed Simon in front of him and said, "Man, you're the one who woke me up. Tell me your name." Hearing the skeleton's question, the boy nervously said, "Simon Felina." To which the skeleton replied, "I see, so you're a descendant of Richard." Hearing this, Simon put his hands over his ears and said that he was a descendant. Cuts his ears, "But that's right. My father's name is Richard, the son of Richard Felina." To which the skeleton exclaimed, "Well now, I understand. Only Richard could awaken the darkness of you that I partially knew." After a short introductory dialogue with the skeleton, Simon added, "Well, I'm sorry, but who are you?" When he heard the boy Bo's question, he replied, "Who am I? My name is Fur, a battalion commander who once ruled the kingdom with your father." When he received the answer to his question, the boy was surprised to hear that you were my father's dead. Pulling out his sword, which was always with him, Fur said, "Tell me, who told you about this place?" Simon answered him by holding out a sheet with a map of Nephis Archibald. Having received an answer to his question, the skeleton scratched his jaw and said, "Well, this witch could do that." "Well then, let's make a deal. Simon Finn, you will have my battalion at your disposal." To which he replied in surprise that there was a deal. Then Fur added, "The battalion will obey your every order and kill anyone who stands in your way. All life on this planet will beg for mercy at your feet. You will be obliged to shed blood and suffer destruction for the rest of your life. It will become an integral part of your destiny. So, Richard's son, what do you think of my proposal? Are you ready to lead a battalion?" After receiving the offer to lead the army of skeletons, Simon said, "First, I have to ask you something. With your permission, I don't know who you are or what you're capable of, but I have never heard of any battalion. Is this battalion of yours really so strong?" Fur answered, "You didn't get confused and even dared to ask questions about the battalion? A great question, man. Well, I'll tell you what, our battalion is so strong that we could level the whole of Key right now, but we can't. Your father, the former battalion commander, disbanded the battalion and sealed us up here, but it was because you were the son of the battalion commander that he woke us up for the first time in many years. You gave us the air of life. If you bring together a scattered battalion and restore it to its former glory, you will have no equal on this earth." Hearing Fur's words, Simon said confidently, "Okay then, I'll sign the contract." When the skeleton heard that, he agreed to accept the terms of the contract. He lifted Simon into the air by the collar and said, "Good choice, man." By putting the boy on a pedestal, Fur opened his chest and revealed the magic ball. The skeleton said, "Put your hand in my yard. Tomorrow your life will change a lot when you sign the contract. You still have a chance to refuse if you are afraid of it." To which Simon replied, "There is nothing to be afraid of. If you and this battalion belong to my father, then it is fitting for me to rule over you." Hearing the boy's words, Fur said, "Ruler," and then thought. At first glance, he seemed to be a quiet and polite boy, but he had a sense of a true ruler. Smiling slightly after his reflections, the skeleton said, "I like your mood, Richard. You have raised a good son. I'm signing a contract. Cracked fur with Simon Felina. But don't die." Hearing what his subject had just said, the boy nervously exclaimed, "Wait, Fur, what does it mean, don't die?" At the end of the ritual, Simon fainted and said, "Oh," in embarrassment. Looking back at the nearby Pied Piper, the skeleton asked, "How do you think your master died?" And he began to shake his head. It didn't take long for the boy to wake up and get up to a sitting position. When he saw this, Fur said, "Oh, he's awake." As soon as Simon woke up, he immediately asked Fur what had happened to the contract. To which he replied, "The contract was signed. Try to feel the changes in your body." Grabbing the place where his core is located, Simon said, "My core?" To which Fur replied, "Now your core should have become bigger and more stable." Feeling the changes that took place in him, the guy said, "Before the darkness overloaded my body to a certain limit, but now I feel light and pleasant, as if I were in warm water." Seeing the changes in the boy's body, the skeleton said to him, "Well, congratulations. You are now one of the 7 battalion commanders." To which he replied, "Thank you." When Simon got to his feet, he felt his balance was off and went to lie down, but Fur said, "Don't overexert yourself. Your body has just undergone an amazing transformation." Hearing this, the guy felt more side effects and put his hand to his head and thought about how much his head hurt. He needed to spend the night here, after which the skeleton added, "You will feel sick for a while." Hearing this, Simon suddenly forgot about his headache and said, "Oh, by the way, I have a question for you, Fur." To which he replied, "Ask away, child." Then the boy said, "What does this battalion of yours look like?" Hearing this question, the skeleton angrily exclaimed, "You signed a contract with me without even knowing what a battalion was?" To which he replied, "I told you I hadn't heard of such a thing." Using the emotion of facepalm, Fur said, "It's incredible. I need time to understand what kind of person you are." "Okay, I'll explain it to you, but first tell me what you know about the dead." To which Simon replied, "I know as much." As a freshman who didn't take any preparatory courses, having received the answer to his question, the skeleton said, "Wow, a newcomer dared to come here. It looks like your father. Well, I'll explain within your understanding. In this world, there are 3 kinds of dead: the natural dead, the undead battalions, and the summoned dead. The summoned dead are the ones you necromancers summon. They are artificially maintained by black magic and follow its orders exactly. The dead cease to exist when the power of magic is exhausted, or when time has expired. The natural dead act without the participation of necromancers or black magic. They are the same stereotypical zombie dead and everything else. They have an irreconcilable hatred for all living things, which is why people also call them monsters. And the last dead of the battalion, we are somewhat in between the first and the second. We are related to the natural undead by our existence without the support of magic in our own core, and to the called ones by the fact that we obey necromancers or older undead. There are only 7 battalions in the world and 7 necromancers who are able to control them." Pointing to Simon, Fear added, "And you are one of them, boy. The average necromancer usually leads a platoon of undead into battle. With the growth of his level, this number increases, but not by much. I have seen undead units, but their quality is SOSO." Hearing Fire's explanation, Simon was surprised to hear Kian say, "I understand, but aren't necromancers graduates of a high level?" To which he replied, "Yes, they are. Such necromancers can lead an entire corps, but they are still not as effective." To which Simon replied in surprise, "Indeed, but why then?" The skeleton added, "I have already said that necromancers control only the summoned dead. So the summoned dead are supported by the power of the necromancer's darkness. Summoning and controlling the dead takes away the darkness and moral strength of the necromancer. The larger the army, the more burdened he is." After another explanation from Fire, Simon said, "Oh, by the way, one of my skeletons was destroyed on the way here and I got a headache." After receiving a remark from Simon, Fear said, "Well, these are natural consequences. The necromancer and the undead are connected. The strong damage of the undead affects the one who summoned them. However, the battalion has its own power, and does not need to be fed, which is why the number of battalions for a necromancer is not limited. You can command thousands or millions of dead. You've heard the story of the necromancer who had the largest army of the undead in history? This is a story about one of the commanders of 7 battalions. Hearing this and looking at his hands, Simon asked in surprise, "So according to you, I've just become one of the necromancers with unlimited summoning?" In response to this, Fur answered, "Yes. Do you have anything else you're interested in, or are these all your questions?" Then the guy confidently said, "Yes, thank you." And then the skeleton added thoughtfully, "Well, the contract is signed. Now we're in the same boat, like it or not. Let's talk about plans. You said you were new to Kaysen, and you're definitely not going to leave him?" To which the guy replied, "No, not yet. I don't want to go against my father's will, and I still have a lot to learn." Then the skeleton added, "Wow, great, Kian does have some value." After listening to his comrade, Simon asked what the circumstances were, to which Fur replied, "That I and my battalion were special due to certain circumstances." Interrupting Fur, the guy asked, "Is it because you were promiscuous?" To which he replied awkwardly, "That it was also because of this, but there was something more serious. My battalion is the enemy of all necromancers, so we are currently being hunted, and all this is because of what your father did when he was the commander of our battalion." When he heard this, the guy was surprised and exclaimed, "Oh my God, what did he do?" Remembering the words of his father, who said before saying goodbye, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I must not cross the border of the kingdom of Dresden, it's a long explanation," Simon said to Fur. "When he saw me off, he mentioned that he was not allowed to go to Dresden." "Is that why?" With his head down, the skeleton said guiltily, "I think it's the consequences of what I did." After which Simon nervously asked what he had done. Then Fur said, "In the world of black magic, such things are unforgivable, and my battalion is an accomplice to it. He committed treason. He fell in love with the priestess at a time when the war between necromancers and priests was in full swing. At the most crucial moment, Richard ordered the battalion to defend his beloved, that is, to destroy his fellow necromancers who came to kill her. My battalion has killed a lot of necromancers, so don't be surprised that they want to destroy us. This order to destroy our battalion is still in force, which is why we cannot act openly." After listening to the story about his father, Simon asked Fur if he was angry with his father, to which he replied that he was. Such a weak emotion does not exist for the undead of the battalion. However, if his son tries to behave that badly, I might get angry by accident. But don't be afraid, boy, it's not your fault. That was your father's order. That was the order of the __. Hearing the skeleton's name, the boy asked, __? In surprise. Then Fur added, "What's there to hide? He was the biggest, __, in the whole world, a complete scoundrel. He made girls cry and made teachers furious, and he skipped classes, even though that was the least of his atrocities. I see that now this, __, has a son." The next moment, realizing the situation, the skeleton exclaimed, "Wait, but son, how did I not realize it at once?" Simon said in surprise, to which Fur added, "You say you are Richard's son? Then your mother." Smiling happily, the boy said, "You guessed. My mother is Anafena." Which sent Fur into a complete shock. Grabbing his head from the shocking news, the skeleton exclaimed, "What a blasphemy! You are the son of my friend and sworn enemy of all the dead." Simon smiled slightly at the reaction of his subject. The next moment, copying his mother's voice and movements, he said, "Dear, dinner is ready. Or maybe you want to take a bath first?" Hearing this, the skeleton grabbed his head and groaned heavily. The next moment, trying to silence Simon's fear, he shouted out, "Stop it! Now stop it! Shameless! I'm going to have nightmares now. Don't use that voice." Running from side to side, the skeleton nervously said, "Why? Why did I deserve this?" Continuing to mock the mocking subject, Simon said, "Let's be friends with Fur." To which the latter scaredly exclaimed, "Stop smiling like that. Woman is cursed. Well, you can't be born again. You are who you are, so let's get back to the important conversation. Now your task is to study hard at Kizan and become stronger. Keep your mouth shut and don't say a word to anyone about your battalion because the guards know your father and your grandfather. They will have serious questions for you and your father if you accidentally say anything. Even more so, you didn't think how angry the necromancers would be when they found out that the newcomer, Kaysen, was in charge of the battalion." When fear poked his finger into Simon's forehead, he shrieked and said, "Then stronger necromancers will hunt me down." To which the skeleton replied, Just like you think you should do. Hearing the question from his friend, Simon confidently said, to become stronger. To which he replied, You're absolutely right, boy. Study hard at Kizan, and we, the battalion, will gradually regain our strength. To which the boy replied, I understand you, Fur. The next moment, the skeleton said, We need a way to manage the battalion in these conditions, so look carefully, boy. And then called the Pied Piper over. When he approached, Fear the skeleton pointed to himself, and gave him an order. The next moment, the Pied Piper went to fulfill the order of his senior comrade. Taking the lantern, he brought it to Fear. When Simon saw it, he was surprised to hear, You could control my hidden undead as well? Hearing the question from the boy, the skeleton replied, Of course. Your darkness is mixed with mine, so all the dead you called belong to the battalion. You are the battalion commander, and I am your second in command, but I am not this. This dead man did not pass the battalion's initialization. To which Simon asked in surprise, What initialization do you mean? Then Fear put his hand on the head of the Pied Piper and said, Look like this. Using his power, the ice cream man was thrown up, and a lot of darkness flew out of him. Then the skeleton said, See? Now he is one of the battalion's members. Looking closely at the ice cream truck he was driving, Simon said thoughtfully, That indeed. But I don't see any changes. It looks exactly the same as before. Hearing the reaction to the initialization from the guy, Fear said, In simple terms, it was the transformation of the summoned undead into natural ones. To which he added, This skeleton had to have its own core. Noticing the significant changes in the rat, Simon said nervously, I didn't know that the difference was so big. They would immediately recognize me if she came to the academy to get me. Hearing this, Fear replied, Well, all the dead don't have to be dedicated to the battalion, except for the ancient ones, of course, like me. They are especially effective in battle, and everyone knows it. You'll leave her here and practice the draft at school as usual. When your dead are nearing the end of their service life or have been injured, bring them to me, and I will dedicate them here. She will wait for you here. If the damage is not fatal, they can be healed. To which Simon replied in surprise, Wow, that's right. Fist bumping with his commander, Fur said happily. Study hard and get stronger, boy. The more quality dead you raise, the more the battalion's power will grow. To which the boy replied, Of course. After examining the rat and its actions after initialization, Simon was surprised to hear its behavior was now more like that of an animal, to which the skeleton replied, It had become closer to a natural dead man. However, the power is in your hands. If you call it, it will come to you. Boy, how long have you been in Kizan? To which he replied, 3 days. Then Fur will inform you that in a few days you will be given tasks, and you will be able to teleport to the island of Rook or anywhere in the world to complete the task. When this moment comes, I will go with you. You will be able to gather versatile soldiers of the battalion around the world. Hearing this, Simon was surprised to hear that he knew a lot about Kizan, to which Fur answered, Of course I do. I watched your father all the time he was here, and I also watched him command the battalion. Do you want me to tell you about it? He exclaimed with joy. Tell me why the conscripted dead can exercise their own will. Hearing the question from the commander, the skeleton replied that this happens when the recruiter does not understand the nature of the dead. They do not act according to the laws of logic and common sense. The dead are attracted to strong, unchanging crafts. Hearing the subject's words, Simon was surprised to ask about the constant trades, to which Fur added that, in simple terms, it could be called an obsession. For example, you have a person whom you sincerely hate. Several times a day, the thought of killing that person runs through your mind. The dead person next to you remembers this constant thought. Hearing his deep words, Simon was surprised to hear him say that it meant that when you are not around, the dead man will encroach on that person's life, even if you are no longer at odds with him or have forgotten your resentment. Your dead man will haunt him until his last breath. I will explain everything to you, so don't worry. You will learn to understand the world from the point of view of the dead. The guy looked at his wingman and added, Thank you, Fur. This is very useful knowledge. A little later, the skeleton added, Since we've started talking about this topic, I'll teach you how to give orders to the dead to destroy the enemy, no matter what the object is. It's important to gather your will into a fist. Let's imagine that the wall behind you is your enemy. Try to direct such hatred at this wall as if it were your worst enemy. To which Simon replied, Okay, I'll try. Continuing to give hints to achieve the goal, the skeleton added, Imagine that this wall killed your parents and your beloved girlfriend. Go ahead and destroy and break down this wall. It is your worst enemy. The devil, watching the boy throw himself against the wall, Fur added, You shouldn't exist. Tear her to pieces so she screams in pain. When he saw the result he had achieved thanks to the guidance, the boy was impressed and said to Fur, I had a little quarrel with this wall so that you could understand my thought process. But the main thing is your will to hate, the ability of a great necromancer to give any, even the most insignificant orders, with authority and firmness, and to think at that moment of anger, hatred, and bloodlust. These negative feelings are quite strong. Well, now try to stop her. You're the boss. To which he nervously replied, Yes. Looking at his subject, Simon exclaimed, Stop it! Now you can stop. Now I said stop. Watching the rat, the eater continued to destroy the wall. The guy exclaimed in surprise, Can't you hear me or something? Angry with his subject, Simon said in a stern tone of voice, If you disobey my orders at least once more, I will not let it go. When Simon Fear saw what he had just done, he was surprised and said in his head, Wow, look at this kid, he's already learned to use an absolute order. Nervous at the speed of the boy's development, the skeleton thought, This is definitely not a country boy. What kind of monster have you sent here, Richard? Looking down after he had tried several times to stop his wingman, Simon said in frustration, What a necromancer I am. Looking at his subject, who was badly damaged but still stopped, he added, I couldn't even make my dead man obey me. Hearing this, Fear replied, No, you did it. However, in battle, there will be no time for delay, so practice your command so that she obeys you the first time. As soon as the skeleton praised his efforts, the boy happily said, Well done, Fur. And then, screaming, fell off his feet. Noticing this, the skeleton said, You're tired, and I understand that. Seeing this is stressful for a person comfortably seated on the ground, Simon said, I'm going to rest a little bit, and then go back to Kien. I have permission to go out for only a day. Hearing this, Fur said, Oh, it means. What? Then take this. And then threw something into Simon's hands. Catching the object, Simon said in surprise, What is it? Opening his palms to look at what was handed to him, the boy heard, You need to connect with me from the outside world. This is my alter ego. Talk to him, and I'll hear you. And don't hesitate to call me if you get into trouble. To which Simon replied with a surprised look, Thanks, Fur. I'll be back here next weekend. To which he replied, Well, I hope you bring me good news about your studies. To which the guy replied, Of course. Watching everything, Simon saw through his alter ego, which he attached to Fur's uniform, and happily said, Bugaloo. How long it's been since I crossed the threshold of Kien. You still have a protection period because I'm curious to see what happens next. Which the guy asked in surprise. For example, thinking about what the next step would be. Fur said, Well, for example, that hellish exam last night. While Xun was sleeping, Simon and Dick started their nightly get-togethers. Having adjusted his glasses before the start, Dick said, Well, let's start our briefing. Hearing his comrade's words, Simon said cautiously, I'm listening to you, Dick. The next moment, pointing to the map with the class schedule, Dick said, Tomorrow evening and morning we have elemental black magic, and as everyone knows, this class is about the spontaneous black magic. Everyone is given group homework. The group is enrolled only once for the entire semester, so it is a matter of survival for us, first of all. There should be 4 people in the group, and it is best to choose excellent students in different subjects. I myself have average grades in all subjects, but a little better in the dynamics of darkness, and you are better in the theory of conscription. So our balance isn't so bad. After all, we only have 9 subjects: the theory of curses, the dynamics of darkness, the theory of conscription, spiritualism, hematology, toxicology, combat magic, and also anti-priestly defense and elemental black magic. Among these subjects, summoning theory, curse theory, and the dynamics of darkness are the most important in final grades, which is why they are called the 3 main sciences in necromancy. Then Simon asked, So you and I are strong in 2 of these 3 sciences, you in the dynamics of darkness and I in the theory of summoning? To which I replied, Exactly, so we need someone strong in the theory of curses. Then Simon added, What should be the 4th one? In response to this, he heard from spiritology, hematology, toxicology, and combat magic, versus priestly defense and elemental magic, which are electives and cannot be taken as a major, so they don't count. For most people, those who are good at combat magic, as a rule, are good only at it, and they can have terrible grades in all other subjects, so we won't take them. Those who want to specialize in curse theory are usually also strong in anti-priestly defense. They know exactly who their enemy is. Hematology is, in many ways, similar to toxicology, so these 2 subjects are usually studied together. After receiving the question from his friend, Dick held up the sheet with the evaluation criteria and said, "Of course, and it is according to them that we will make the selection. If the best student does not agree, then we will continue the search based on what will work out. We need to emphasize that in our group, the number one student is accepted under special conditions. Everything is clear." At the end of the introductory briefing on finding a group for the group task, the guys joyfully shouted, "Well, forward to victory!" The next day, sitting at the exam with the answer sheet, Simon grabbed his head and said, "I've won." When Dick saw the teacher who came to their class, he nervously whispered, "Why is she here in a class of freshmen?" The teacher was surprised to hear who she was. Then Dick said to Jane, "Olivia, the deputy wrecker. She's a walking nightmare, kicking everyone out right and left, even in her third year." Noticing that one of the students was disrupting the class, the deputy wrecker said menacingly, "Life is full of surprises. If you keep talking, I will consider it an attempt to cheat and give you a 0. I see that not only Mr. Hayward is confused by my appearance at the exam. You know I'm only a third-year teacher, so you might assume that I'm substitute teaching today. But I'll be teaching the first A class this semester, so I hope you will succeed. I need high performance, and now I'm going to ask you to concentrate on the exam." To which I answered, "Well," grabbing my head. While writing the exam, Simon thought, "This is the reality. I somehow managed to do it up to this point, and I even took over my father's battalion, but this will not give me anything in terms of success at Keene. But I'm not going to give up, I'm going to keep working tirelessly." As soon as the lesson time came to an end, all the students stopped writing and took the forms to the teacher, who said, "I hope the exam was not too hard for you. See you in 2 hours after lunch. Well done." When Jane's assistants arrived in the classroom, Olivia said, "Well, let's start the test," and was answered by the professor, "Yes, Professor." While everyone was working on checking the papers, Nephthys entered the classroom. Noticing that she was spying on their work, Olivia said, "What brings you here at this hour, Mr. Nephthys?" When she heard that she had been noticed, she happily exclaimed, "Oh, I came to hang out." Looking at the rector who had come to them, Olivia tapped her on the head and said, "You're distracting me," and then told her assistants to go to the empty classroom and finish the test, which she did. Clutching her head after the blow, Nephthys exclaimed resentfully, "When I pulled you out of the slums, you were such a sweet and trusting girl." To which Olivia replied sternly, "A sweet and trusting girl has grown into what you see before you, and all thanks to constant overwork and stress." With a heavy sigh, the professor added, "Maybe you can at least help me with the tests since you've come." Looking at the answer sheet of one of the students, she was surprised to think that this student had answered all the most basic questions incorrectly but had solved the most difficult task. "Nephthys, I want to ask you something," and she answered by drawing on the forms. "Go ahead and ask." Peeling off the sticker from the name tag to see who the student was, Olivia asked, "Why you gave me this class from the first semester?" Shoving Simon's form in Nephthys's face, she added, "A touch of class. Specifically, I'm talking about a class with this boy in it." Continuing to check the tests, the witch was surprised to ask why all the names were taped over and was told that it was called a blind test. "If I know the student's name, it could have an unnecessary impact on the grade." To which Nephthys nervously replied, "That's a pretty weird test for the first test of the semester." "You scare me, Jane." The next moment, Olivia added that it was just a test, but I had already made a lot of interesting discoveries. Like this test you're scribbling on, which answered the second toxicology question about the ingredients correctly, but not the verification question below. Hearing this, Nephthys, waving the answer sheets angrily, claimed, "That's what I'm talking about. This child is a dummy. I even wondered who he was." Taking another blank in her hands, Olivia said, "But this test shows the opposite picture." The student was unable to answer the simplest questions and earn at least some points, but decided to try to answer the very difficult question number 20. To which Nephthys asked him what was really going on, holding out the answer sheet to the director. Olivia said, "Apparently this student did not attend any preparatory courses. He just tried to derive the answer using the formula he had passed since the beginning of the school year." Picking up the sheet with the solution to the 20th problem, Nephthys said in surprise that he had used a formula from the theory of call to calculate the darkness dissipation. Maybe he had just logically guessed that the darkness dissipation was affected by the force of resistance. To which Olivia replied similarly. After hearing her subordinate's answer, the manager asked what the correct answer was, and Jimia replied, "Using theorems, it is easy to calculate that the expense is 1,200,000, but this student wrote 146,000 more, which is the wrong answer, although it is close to the truth." When asked what she was assigned to the class where Simon Fenna was studying, Olivia was told that she had no idea what she was talking about and then thought, what to expect from this insidious 300-year-old fox. Sometime after the end of the exam, they posted the overall scores of the exam, and the students who arrived at the list were looking for themselves and exclaimed, "Wow! I got 85 points in theory. Damn it! Hematology ruined my overall score. Wow! I got a total score of 80. At the same time, Dick, who also came to see his results, was impressed and said, "Wow! They graded so fast." To which Simon replied, "Yeah." Continuing to look for themselves in the list, the students pushed their way through, exclaiming, "Let me see the grades. But my curses. Maybe I should go to another specialty. Hey, why did I get 5 points in all the questions of combat magic? I didn't need to change them." When he saw his exam results, he said disappointedly, "I thought I would be ready for this, but it's still very depressing to see the results." To which Dick replied, "By the way, you have a very high score in the theory of recruitment, which is pretty good for someone who didn't take preparatory classes." Slapping his friend on the back to cheer him up, Dick added happily, "I told you yesterday that it's better to be an A student in at least one subject than a C student in all subjects." Hearing this, the upset boy replied, "Really? What are your grades?" To which he replied, "I have 74 for the dynamics of darkness. The rest of the subjects are 67, so the average grade is about 70. When Simon heard about his friend's results, he said offended, "Oh, you're a good student. I feel like a traitor." To which he replied, "Actually, no. I'm studying just enough to avoid being kicked out of the academy. By the way, we are now in trouble because of this exam." To which Simon replied in surprise, after which Dick added, "The class grades are now in the palm of his hand. Now this will interfere with our plan to recruit a group. Now that the students know who is worth what because of the grades, we will be very lucky if anyone agrees to join our group." After which the whole class heard the teacher's stern voice, "Attention! You have 30 minutes. Jane Olivia stood right in the doorway of the classroom with her hands folded in front of her. "Review your grades and quickly divide and congregate into groups of 4. The group does not change throughout the semester unless there are very desperate situations when you are assigned to a group. Group lectures on elemental black magic will begin, and you will be given group homework that can only be done together. The grades for group assignments are kept separately from the overall grades. If you do not do well in group homework, these points will be deducted from your grade, so you cannot be an excellent student on your own. And that's why you need to choose your group wisely. It's clear." As soon as the teacher finished the announcement, the audience heard the cries of Jasmine, looking for 3 participants with good grades in the 3 main necromantic sciences of 60 points and above. "I am an excellent student in spiritualism. Does anyone want to join the team with me? Put me in the group. I have about 60 in all subjects. I'm an excellent student in combat magic. Who needs an excellent student in combat magic?" At the same time, unfolding a piece of paper with a list of candidates, Simon mentally said Dick said he would talk to Jimia. He is the first on our list of Claudius's friend. When he saw that one of their candidates had already been invited to the group, he was disappointed to think that she had already been wrapped over the coals. The third, Rosenthal, and Catherine, number 4, decided to work together. "Calm down. Take your time. No one has had time to gather a group of 4 people yet. There's no need to panic just because we were given only 30 minutes. What we need most right now is an excellent student in the theory of curses. Most of the students are already in the middle 3, and the best students were still watching from the sidelines, running around the room looking for a suitable candidate." Simon confidently said to himself, "Then I have to make a choice." Arriving at the second of those admitted under special conditions, he said to Mean, "Wyland, I invite you to join our group." Seeing what he had just done, the rest of the students froze in place in shock as he walked over to Mean, the only student with a 90% average. Hearing the proposal, the girl replied with a good joke. "You probably think that your status as the number 1 special student opens all doors for you, boy, which means only one thing: you have connections. I look at the numbers and see that you have an average grade of 30 points, and you seriously offer me to enroll?" Simon said, "I see that you are a little short on the draft theory. You only have 80 points on it." To which she replied, "Who can say?" Behind their backs, the other students whispered, "He's pointing out the shortfall with his 30 points. That's how desperate the guy is trying to somehow dissuade her." Men added, "My grades don't even compare to yours." To which he replied, "I know, but I promise you, give me just 1 month and I will overtake you on the theory of conscription. If I fail, I will leave." Hearing Simon's desperate words, Mean exploded. Are you crazy? She quickly took back what she said to avoid shaming him. To which he replied, I will not. I'm not just saying this without any reason. She sighed nervously, going through the options in her head about what she should do. Men thought, I have to do whatever it takes to be the best in my grades next semester, and Hector is a pain in the ass in the written exams. I can beat him, but he's stronger than me in practice and combat magic. I have to beat him several times in group homework. I need someone to cover my failure in draft theory. Simon Fenna is the #1 recruit accepted on special terms. This is a guy who had no prior training, and yet managed to beat Hector in the theory of the draft. How can I blame you for looking for someone with a score above 80 in the theory? With a heavy sigh, the girl got to her feet and said, That's your promise? Are you sure you can do it? Simon confidently answered, Yes, reaching out to the girl to hold her candidacy. He added, I will do whatever it takes. Convinced of Simon Fenna's serious intentions, Mean shook his hand and said, Very well, then I will join you. When Dick heard that he had managed to recruit such a candidate, he immediately jumped on his friend with hugs and joyful exclamations. Simon, you are our savior. As Mean saw this, she said, Hey, who is this guy? To which he replied, He is another member of our group. Don't you remember? I told you I was inviting you to join our group. But don't worry, he got a good grade in the dynamics of darkness, and the three of us are a strong team in basic science. Okay, I'm not a sparrow, but if you drag me down, I won't let it go, especially if you're a bastard. To which Dick replied with displeasure, She's arrived, and she calls me names. Then the girl added, So you say we have dynamics and a call? Then I'll be responsible for the curse, so we'll have all 3 sciences. The next moment, approaching Dick, Mean said, But first tell me, you're great in the dynamics of darkness. To which he answered, 70 in all subjects. The girl interrupted, replying, Well then. Dick, holding his friend's shoulders, added, You're quite picky, so which student will be the next one? Just tell me, and I'll find him. Thinking about the boy's question, Men thoughtfully replied, Well, I'm an excellent student in all subjects. Before she could finish, he interrupted her, saying, Come on, tell me who you would choose. Thinking more seriously, the girl said unhappily, I need someone in hematology. It's a big mess with calculations, and in general, this subject takes a lot of time. To which Dick happily replied, I'll be there soon, and you can relax. Looking at the couple sitting together, the surprised students were talking among themselves. Wow, they are in the same group! The special #1 and the round excellent student. Well, we are finished. Hey, it's not even the evening of the grade, he's below the baseboard. After a while of sitting in silence, Men asked, Your name is Fenna? I've never heard of such a family. Where are you from? He replied, I am the son of a landowner from the kingdom of Foolish. We own a settlement called Lil. Where are you from, and who are your parents? Hearing this question from the guy, the girl exclaimed, offended, Are you serious? To which he replied, Yes. Then the girl, trying to contain her anger, joyfully said, The Wyland family is a famous titled family that traces its lineage to the mages of the Ivory Tower. To which Simon added, Ivory Tower is a magic tower, yes. In response, the girl added that it was called that way 3 centuries ago. Hearing something familiar to him, the guy said, That's where Serna lives, she's #2 among the specials. Hearing who he had just mentioned, Mean said menacingly, I'm sorry, but let's close this topic. To which Simon, frightened, replied, Okay. The second number the boy thought I shouldn't have mentioned. Serna, like that, with a heavy sigh, he added in his head that this is how hard it is to understand the nobility. After a while, Dick arrived and brought with him someone else who was hiding behind him and exclaimed, Sorry to keep you waiting. But here comes our hematology expert, a star that is just beginning its ascent with an incredible score of 87. When Ursula Cami Bars heard that she was introduced, she nervously said, Thank you for letting me into your group. Bowing to the other participants, she added, My name is Cams Ursula. You can call me Cami. I will do everything for the success of the group. Looking at the new member, Men was surprised to hear that she had wings. The next moment, trying to calm the girl's anxiety, Simon said, You don't have to be so nice to us, we're classmates. To which she replied, But I'm only 16. Dick added, Never mind the age, there are some of us in our 20s. Hearing the advice, Cami said, Well, I'll know then. Men asked her, Ursula? You mean the Ursula I was thinking of? When Cami heard the question, she drank in surprise. Sorry. Then Men added, A large family of vampires. Dick exclaimed in fright. Actually, I've heard that a certain Lady Ursula is studying at CAS, but I've never heard of her. Men said. Hey, you should hold your tongue about that. And he replied, How could you? Interrupting the conversation, her friends, Cammy said, The fact that my mother is an ordinary person. This news stunned all three of her friends. When Dick came to, he said, I'm sorry, I didn't know what I was saying. And then Simon thought, I understand. Ursula is a bastard in the family. No wonder no one talks about her. She has the same unsavory background from the point of view of society as I do. After that, Dick said, Well, I think it would be appropriate for me to tell you who I am. I'm a simple man. My father is the owner of a white hair merchant union. When Cammy heard this, she exclaimed in surprise that a white hair was one of the largest merchant unions. Then the guy added, I'm the third son of 9, the only descendant. The eldest will get everything, which is why I feel like I have no rights in the family, and they want to use me somewhere. I'm ashamed to admit it, but they sent me to Kaizen because they thought I was a little bit gifted in black magic. While I'm in Kaizen, I have to do consumer market research for the family's trade union. Hearing this, Simon immediately recalled a conversation with his friend in the room and said, Why did you say that visiting Rochester is more important than studying? To which he replied, Yes, but that doesn't mean I'm only doing what my father told me to do. I'll graduate from Kaizen and create my own merchant union in Rochester, and I'll be a big shot so that even my father will see that I'm not useless. Hearing this, Simon said, Well done. And then Cammy added, Good luck, Dick. And only men added, What a fool. After a while, a boy approached the group of students and said, Wow, we have a friendly group here. The teacher's assistant replied, Congratulations. Holding out the form, the man said, Your group is number 7. Write down the names of the participants and the items you will be making a special effort to address. Come up with a name for the group, but it's not as important as the leader of the group at the time. Simon answered, Well, we understood. Men snatched the form from the guy's hands. When the form was in front of the girl, Simon said, If you're already a key member of the group, you can be our leader. Men replied, Of course. After writing down the name of the group leader, men said, So, what are some suggestions for naming our group? Sometime after filling out the form, the assistant took it away and posted it on the common board. It read, Leader Mon named 7th group members and subjects, Men Wyland Curse Theory. Simon Felina Call Theory, Dick Hayward Dynamics of Darkness, Cammy Bars Ursula Hematology. After completing the filling in, the group leader said, I like Mean's option better. After which Cammy added, Pink rabbits for me. Suddenly, someone in the audience said, Who needs you with such a poor specialization? But there are 2 of us, and there are 2 of you, both in toxicology. We don't need a couple of ballasts like you. Just said the 3 of them are in the dynamics of darkness. They are crazy. And the 3 of them are in the dynamics of guilt, and they want to create a group seriously. I'm going to take this specialization, but my grades in all subjects are normal, and I don't need such a group. I'm leaving you. After listening to what was happening, Simon said, Wow, the atmosphere is getting tense. To which Dick replied, No wonder. Elemental black magic classes require knowledge of all subjects, which is why there should be diversity in the group. That's why if you make friends with fellow excellent students in the same subject, you'll have problems later. The guy added, So we were very lucky. Pointing to a group of 3, Serna Andar said, I will only ransom one of you. Hearing this, the guy angrily exclaimed, Hey, you already kidnapped Lucy from us, so we would have a full group. The next moment, another girl left their group, saying she was sorry, and when the guys saw that another member had left them, they exclaimed, How could you? When she joined Serna AR's group, she said, I'm a hematology specialist. I hope you'll need me. To which the leader replied, Of course, welcome. And you're a smart girl. When Simon saw the methods of creating groups, he spoke harshly, and his friend replied that others would never mind Simon. This often happens during the period of student protection. If we do not compete, we will inevitably fall behind others. As for those who lag behind, Kaysen Millen said, I don't see what the big deal is. These are the natural consequences of laziness, lack of talent, and lack of insight. They had more than a week from the beginning of the school year, and what they did was interesting. If they had low grades, we had to look for a group based on other criteria. When the time was up, the teacher said, All the time is up. Whoever is left without a group, come to the board. Seeing the people who came up to the board, the students from the audience said, Oh, it seems that we won't see them next week. Your dynamics are so good, and there is only one task left. So, the theories are cursed, and they are over. Hearing the voices of the rest of her classmates, Jane Olivia asked. If you were angry, a difficult beginning does not always guarantee a bad ending. Hold on to this anger and use it to your advantage. If you distribute the subjects correctly and pull yourself up, you can hope for at least an average grade. We sit down. To which the students answered, Yes, Professor. Having completed the formation of the student groups, the teacher spoke to the groups. Now listen to an important announcement. Next week, the period of student protection ends, and group assignments will begin. At the first lesson of elemental black magic, you will fight a monster, and this monster will be. While Jane Olivia was making the announcement, the assistants were hanging the poster. When all the preparatory processes were completed, the professor added, The Cyclops. When they heard who they would have to fight, confused voices came from the audience. The Cyclops? How can we handle a Cyclops with our abilities? Hearing the noise in the classroom, the teacher shouted quietly. I'm going to explain the rules. You will go down to the Keys and Dungeon as a group and fight the Cyclops together. However, it should be so that one leads the attack, and the rest support him with fire or do everything to weaken the monster. Weakening spells like depletion, binding, and blinding are allowed, as well as hematological spells, drawing blood and toxicology. Weakening and summoning creatures are also allowed. All other particularly deadly black magic spells are forbidden. You will read more detailed rules in the instructions that you will be given. The attacking Necromancer will be given protective equipment with a protective enchantment. The score will depend on the success of your hunt. Evaluation criteria include speed, consistency, teamwork, ingenuity, and use of magic. You will need to be thoroughly prepared. This can be your key to successfully completing your assignment. So that's it. Do you have any more questions? The next moment, from the audience, Jamie Victoria asked, Is this a real Cyclops, Professor, or will we use the keys in a virtual battle system? When the teacher heard the question, she said, No, it's a real Cyclops caught in the Western lands. By the way, you reminded me of that. You will need to write a waiver of claims in the event of a fatal outcome. There were some more questions, after which another student raised his hand, and then Scott Schneider exclaimed, What happens if we can't defeat the Cyclops? To which the teacher replied, You will get 0 points, and the assignment will be considered failed in 3 cases. The first is when the attacking Necromancer is put out of action. Secondly, when the professor or supervisor decides that the fight cannot be continued or the data is not available. And third, when one of the group refuses to complete the task. Hearing what awaited them in the near future, Mean said, If the Cyclops is real, they will need to develop a strategy. Then Simon added, I'm just thrilled. My heart is beating so hard. And Cammy added, I'm a little scared. Then Dick asked, Who would be the striker? Hearing the question, the group leader confidently exclaimed, As the strongest, of course that I was. To which Simon replied, Of course. However, if there is only one attacker, won't this play too much in favor of those who are strong in combat magic? To which Cammy added, I also thought about it. The Cyclops attacks are very strong, and you can't defend against them with black magic, and the defense spells consume a lot of darkness, so I think you just have to dodge. Millen pointed out, Actually, I don't think we should do that. Fans of martial magic will mostly hit with physical blows. But think about it. Think about whether a stone body of a Cyclops can be harmed by this. To which Dick answered, Exactly. The skin of the Cyclops is thick and strong. Even if they are strengthened with the help of darkness, they will not have enough stamina to fight.